Hello, and welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're grateful for each view and comment. Tell us, from which country or city are you watching today? We enjoy connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Glass. The day Victor Reeves proposed to Melanie Porter was the crowning achievement of his life. Not the millions he'd made transforming a failing construction company into Boston's premier real estate developer. Not the sprawling lakeside mansion in Sudbury that graced architectural magazines. Those were merely steps to winning her, the brilliant art curator whose smile lit up every charity gala in New England. Now, 15 years later, Victor stood at his office window, watching snow blanket the city. At 45, his dark hair showing distinguished silver at the temples, he remained as formidable as when he'd clawed his way up from nothing. The son of a janitor, Victor had learned early that the world belonged to those who seized it without remorse. "Mr. Reeves?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 2 o'clock is here. Send him in, Denise." Mitchell Bennett entered with the cautious tread of someone delivering bad news. Victor had hired the private investigator 3 months ago, not out of suspicion, but opportunity. A business rival, Lawrence Kessler, had been making aggressive moves against Victor's company. Victor simply wanted ammunition. "You asked me to monitor Kessler's activities," Mitchell began, "but I found something else." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Go on. It's about Mrs. Reeves." The air in the room seemed to thin. Victor's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened imperceptibly on his desk. "She's been meeting someone. Regularly. A man named Alexander Dunleavy." "The artist?" Victor asked, his voice betraying nothing. "Yes, sir. They've been intimate." Victor nodded once. "Show me." Mitchell handed over an envelope. The photographs inside told an unmistakable story. Melanie and Alexander in various stages of embrace. Hotel receipts, text messages, a timeline extending back nearly 7 months. "Continue your surveillance," Victor said calmly. "I want everything. Where they meet, what they discuss, their plans." "Sir, there's more." Mitchell hesitated. "They've discussed leaving. Together. And there's mention of taking certain assets with them." Victor's expression didn't change, but something cold and terrible settled in his eyes. "Thank you, Mitchell. That will be all." After the investigator left, Victor remained motionless, staring at the evidence of his wife's betrayal. Melanie, who had access to all their accounts. Melanie, who knew every detail of his business dealings, his vulnerabilities, his secrets. His phone rang. His daughter Natalie, a senior at Wellesley College. Her vibrant personality always reminded him of Melanie when they'd first met. "Hey, sweetheart. Dad, are we still on for dinner Thursday? I need fashion advice for this interview." "Always," he replied, his voice warm despite the cold calculation already forming in his mind. After hanging up, Victor opened his safe and removed a leather journal, one he hadn't touched in years. Inside were contingency plans for every possible disaster, business failures, political scandals, even kidnapping attempts. He'd never written one for this. It was time to start. He wouldn't merely survive this betrayal. Victor Reeves never just survived. Those who crossed him learned one immutable truth. He didn't fight to win. He fought to ensure his enemies never recovered. Victor looked at the calendar. 3 weeks until their anniversary dinner, the grand celebration Melanie had been planning for months. The corners of his mouth turned up slightly. Perfect timing. Chapter 2. Deception's Architecture. Melanie Reeves moved through their home with the grace of someone accustomed to beauty. At 42, she remained stunning, her auburn hair cut in an elegant bob, her figure toned from relentless yoga sessions. She was arranging flowers in the foyer when Victor arrived home. "You're early," she said, offering her cheek for a kiss. Victor obliged. "Thought I'd help with dinner. Natalie's coming, right? And bringing that new boyfriend." Melanie smiled. "I've already warned her I'll be interrogating him thoroughly." Victor watched her closely. The ease of her lie was remarkable. How she could discuss family dinner while planning to abandon them. In his pocket, he fingered the small recording device he'd planted in her car that morning. Their younger child, Connor, thundered down the stairs, baseball gear in tow. At 16, he was already taller than Victor, all gangly limbs and perpetual hunger. "Dad, can we hit some balls before dinner?" "Let me change first," Victor replied, ruffling his son's hair. As he climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Victor mentally reviewed what he'd learned. Alexander Dunleavy had appeared in their lives 3 years ago when Melanie curated an exhibition featuring his work. The artist's rise had been meteoric since then, fueled, Victor now understood, by Melanie's connections and possibly Victor's own unwitting financial support. In their bedroom, Victor accessed the hidden panel behind their closet, where he kept his most sensitive documents. Among them was a red folder labeled contingencies. He added new notes about Melanie's schedule, her passwords, her recent purchases. His phone buzzed with a text from Mitchell, D-Planning Gallery opening in NYC next month. Tickets purchased for 2. Victor smiled grimly. So they had a departure date. At dinner, Natalie charmed everyone with stories from college while her boyfriend Blake answered Victor's probing questions about his finance internship. Victor played the role of engaged father perfectly while recording every interaction with Melanie for later analysis. "By the way," he mentioned casually over dessert, "I need to update our wills. That meeting with Pearson's client last week, the one who died intestate, it got me thinking." Melanie looked up. "Oh, sure. Whatever you think is best. I'll set it up for next week," Victor replied, noting how she failed to ask any questions. The old Melanie would have had concerns, suggestions. Later that night, with Melanie asleep beside him, Victor slipped away to his home office and connected to the cameras he'd installed throughout the house. He reviewed footage of Melanie on her laptop earlier that day, using magnification software to catch her password as she typed. By 3 a.m., he had access to her private email account. The messages between her and Alexander were explicit, not just in their romance, but in their plans. "Victor suspects nothing," she'd written last week. "Once we're gone, it will be too late for him to stop the transfers." Victor's jaw tightened as he read further. Alexander and Melanie weren't just planning to leave. They were systematically preparing to destroy him. Alexander had connections to Lawrence Kessler, his business rival. They planned to take everything: money, proprietary business information, even custody of Connor. Most men would have confronted her immediately. Most men would have acted from hurt. Victor was not most men. He closed the laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the property he'd built for a family that was now fracturing. But unlike his father, who'd collapsed under the weight of betrayal when Victor's mother left, Victor would emerge stronger. He turned back to his desk and began drawing up plans. Melanie thought she knew him. She was wrong. She knew only what he had allowed her to see. The real Victor Reeves was about to introduce himself. Chapter 3: The Precipice. The anniversary party preparations accelerated over the next 2 weeks. Melanie threw herself into the details, a lavish celebration at the Hawthorne Hotel where they'd held their wedding reception. 200 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, custom-made ice sculptures. Victor approved every expense with apparent enthusiasm. "Spare nothing," he told her, watching her eyes light up. 15 years deserves commemoration. Meanwhile, he methodically executed the first phase of his plan. He transferred funds to accounts Melanie couldn't access. He met privately with his lawyers to modify their prenuptial agreement based on infidelity concerns he claimed to have drafted years ago but never filed, backdating documents with the help of a notary who owed him several favors. He installed specialized software on Melanie's devices, capturing every communication with Alexander. Their plans grew clearer. Melanie would withdraw $5 million after the anniversary party, claiming it was for a surprise art acquisition. By the time Victor discovered the theft, they would be beyond reach in a country with limited extradition. On Tuesday, Victor visited Connor's school for a parent-teacher conference, using the opportunity to plant seeds of doubt about Melanie's commitment to their son's future. "Your mother seems distracted lately," he mentioned casually as they drove home. "Have you noticed?" Connor shrugged. "She's busy with the gallery stuff, I guess." "I worry sometimes," Victor continued, "about her priorities." That evening, as snow fell again, Victor received a call from Mitchell. "Sir, I've confirmed Dunleavy's connection to Kessler. They've met 3 times in the past month. I've got recordings. Send them to my secure server, Victor instructed. And Mitchell, I need you to deliver an envelope to Detective Warren Cox. He'll know what it means. The detective had been in Victor's pocket for years, useful for making problems disappear. The envelope contained evidence of Alexander's tax fraud, carefully manufactured by Victor's financial team, but convincing enough to warrant investigation. Friday brought Natalie home for the weekend. Victor took her to lunch at her favorite bistro. "How are things with you and Mom?" she asked, surprising him with her perceptiveness. "You seem different with each other." Victor chose his words carefully. "Your mother has been preoccupied with her career lately. It's natural at certain points in a marriage. She missed my presentation last month," Natalie said quietly. "She promised to come." Victor covered his daughter's hand with his own. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You know I would have been there if I could." "I know, Dad." She smiled. "You always show up." The seed planted itself perfectly. No accusations against Melanie, just contrast. Victor as the reliable parent, Melanie as increasingly absent. That night, Victor finalized the most crucial element of his plan. He contacted a security specialist he'd used for his corporate offices. "I need a comprehensive system installed, immediately and discreetly." "The usual parameters, Mr. Reeves?" "No," Victor replied. "Something different this time. Something theatrical." The night before the anniversary party, Victor stood in his study reviewing everything. The stage was set. All players were in position. Melanie's betrayal would not just be revealed. It would be enshrined in memory. His phone rang. It was Alexander Dunleavy. Victor smiled and answered. "Mr. Dunleavy, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I think we should meet," Alexander said, his voice tense. "About your wife." "Indeed." Victor's tone remained pleasant. "What an interesting suggestion. Tomorrow night, perhaps? I'm hosting a little gathering you might find illuminating." "This isn't a game, Reeves." "On that," Victor said, "we are in complete agreement." After hanging up, Victor poured himself a whiskey and raised it toward the photograph of his father on the wall, the man who'd taught him that weakness was unforgivable. "Watch and learn, old man," he murmured. "Watch and learn." Chapter 4. Clockwork Vengeance. The morning of the anniversary celebration dawned bright and cold. Victor woke early, watching Melanie sleep beside him. For 15 years, he believed her to be the exception to his rule of trusting no one. That miscalculation would not go unpunished. Over breakfast, he presented her with a small box. "A preview," he said, as Connor watched eagerly from across the table. Melanie opened it to find a platinum bracelet studded with diamonds. "It's beautiful," she whispered, guilt flashing briefly across her features. Victor clasped it around her wrist. "I had it engraved." She turned it to read the inscription, "Truth will out." "Shakespeare?" she asked, her smile faltering slightly. "The Merchant of Venice," Victor confirmed. "One of my favorites." He left for the office while Melanie finalized party details. At precisely 10 a.m., he received confirmation that Alexander had been contacted by Detective Cox regarding financial irregularities. By noon, the detective reported that Alexander appeared significantly distressed. Perfect. Victor's next meeting was with Boyd Whitaker, Melanie's brother. The man had struggled with gambling debts for years, and Victor had quietly bailed him out multiple times, a fact kept from Melanie at Boyd's insistence. "I need a favor," Victor told him over lunch. "Anything," Boyd replied instantly. "You know that. Tonight at the party, I need you to deliver something to Melanie at exactly 9:30. Boyd looked confused but nodded. "Sure. What is it?" Victor handed him a sealed envelope. "A surprise. Part of our anniversary celebration." His next call was to Natalie, confirming she would bring the family albums he'd requested for the anniversary video. And make sure to include those photos from Martha's Vineyard last summer. Photos that Victor had carefully edited to include shadow figures in windows, suggesting surveillance long before Melanie realized. By 4 p.m., Victor returned home to dress for the evening. Melanie was already gone, overseeing final preparations at the hotel. He used the opportunity to activate the security protocols installed throughout their house and check that his home office was prepared for what would follow. Detective Cox called again. Dunleavy's rattled. He tried to access his offshore account, the one you flagged for us. He's making mistakes. Excellent, Victor replied. Maintain pressure, but keep him functional. I need him coherent tonight. The final piece fell into place when Mitchell texted, package delivered to hotel suite as requested. At 7 p.m., Victor arrived at the Hawthorne. Guests were already filling the ballroom. Colleagues, friends, family members, all unwitting participants in the evening's true purpose. Melanie glided through the crowd in a burgundy gown that Victor had specifically requested she wear, a dress that matched, not coincidentally, the shade of carpet in the hotel suite he'd reserved upstairs. You look stunning, he told her, kissing her cheek. A vision. Thank you. She smiled, searching his face. Are you all right? You seem excited, he supplied. It's not every day we celebrate 15 years. The evening progressed with speeches, dinner, dancing. Victor played the devoted husband flawlessly, his hand never leaving Melanie's waist during their first dance. At their table, he raised a toast that brought tears to guests' eyes. To my beautiful wife, who has given me everything a man could desire, he said, looking directly into her eyes. To the life we've built together. May its foundation never crumble. At 9:15, Victor excused himself briefly, sending a text to Alexander. I know everything. Suite 1540. Now, at 9:25, he noticed Melanie check her phone, her face paling slightly before she excused herself. At 9:30, Boyd approached Victor. I gave her the envelope when she was heading for the elevator. What was in it? A room key, Victor replied calmly. She's meeting someone. Boyd's confusion turned to shock. What are you talking about? Your sister has been planning to leave me, Victor said, his voice level. Tonight's her last hurrah before disappearing with her lover and millions of my money. That's impossible, Boyd protested. Melanie wouldn't. Follow me if you want proof, Victor interrupted, already walking toward the elevators. They rode in silence to the 15th floor, Boyd shifting uncomfortably beside him. Victor checked his watch, 9:40 exactly. Outside suite 1540, Victor paused. What you're about to see may be disturbing, he warned. But necessary. He inserted his key card and opened the door. The suite's entryway was dark, but voices came from the bedroom. Victor motioned for Boyd to remain silent as they approached. Through the partially open door, they could see Melanie and Alexander in heated conversation. He knows something, Alexander was saying frantically. Cox showed up at my studio today, asking about offshore accounts. That's impossible, Melanie insisted. Victor trusts me completely. The transfer is still on for tomorrow. And what about Kessler? If Victor discovers our connection, he won't, Melanie snapped. I've been careful. Once we're gone, it won't matter anyway. He'll be ruined before he can track us down. Victor pushed the door fully open, flooding the room with light. Melanie whirled around, her face transforming from shock to calculation in seconds. Victor, she began, this isn't what looks like, he finished, his voice terrifyingly calm. I believe it's exactly what it looks like, Melanie. You and Mr. Dunleavy planning your escape while simultaneously orchestrating my destruction. Alexander stepped forward. Listen, Reeves, I'm not interested in anything you have to say, Victor cut him off. Except perhaps an explanation of your recent conversations with Lawrence Kessler regarding my company's proprietary development plans. The artist blanched. Boyd pushed past Victor. Mel, tell me this isn't true. Melanie's expression hardened. You don't understand, Boyd. Victor has everything. He's always had everything. I deserve my share. Your share, Victor repeated softly. Interesting choice of words for theft, conspiracy, and corporate espionage. He removed his phone and pressed a button. Instantly, the room's hidden speakers activated, playing recordings of Melanie and Alexander discussing their plans in explicit detail. You've been monitoring me? Melanie asked, outrage replacing shock. No, Victor corrected. I've been building a case. He turned to Boyd. Your sister isn't just leaving me. She's been selling information to my competitors, planning to empty our accounts, even arranged to frame me for tax fraud to prevent me from pursuing her. Boyd stared at his sister in disbelief. Mel, how could you? Oh, please, she spat. Victor's no saint. Do you know what he did to get where he is? The people he stepped on? The difference, Victor replied evenly, is that I never betrayed family. He pressed another button on his phone. The bedroom door swung fully open to reveal Detective Cox, standing there, with two uniformed officers. Mr. Dunleavy, Cox said formally, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, corporate espionage, and attempted grand larceny. As the officers handcuffed a protesting Alexander, Victor turned to Melanie. You won't be arrested tonight, he told her. That would disrupt our anniversary party. But when you return home, you'll find your access to our accounts revoked, your studio locked, your belongings packed. You can't do this, she hissed. I already have, Victor replied. The prenuptial agreement you signed included an infidelity clause with specific penalties, all documented and witnessed years ago. Her eyes widened. That's not possible. I would have remembered. Would you? Victor stepped closer. Or did you simply sign what your loving husband placed before you? The realization dawned on her face. You forged documents. Prove it, he challenged softly. As Alexander was led away, Victor addressed the detective. When you search Mr. Dunleavy's studio, you'll find the evidence we discussed. Cox nodded. We'll be thorough, sir. Victor turned back to Melanie, whose face had transformed from defiance to calculation. You're forgetting our children, she said. They'll never forgive you for this. Victor smiled thinly. We'll see about that. He checked his watch. We should return to our guests. We have an anniversary video to present in 20 minutes. As they left, Boyd remained behind, staring at his sister with newfound understanding. You picked the wrong man to betray Mel. Her laughter followed them out. You have no idea what you've started, Victor. No, he replied calmly as the elevator doors closed. But I know exactly how it ends. Chapter 5, The Illusionist's Gambit. The remainder of the anniversary party unfolded like a masterful theatrical production. Victor guided Melanie back to their table, his hand firmly around her waist. To guests, a loving gesture. To Melanie, an unspoken warning. Smile, dear, he murmured. Your mascara's running. The anniversary video began playing on large screens throughout the ballroom, a chronological journey through their marriage. Childhood photos of both. Their wedding day. The births of Natalie and Connor. Family vacations. And then, subtle irregularities appeared. Photos of Melanie with Alexander at gallery openings. Victor's enhanced versions highlighting their closeness. Footage of Melanie entering hotels on days she'd claimed to be elsewhere. All presented with a narration that seemed innocent but carried double meanings. Melanie has always pursued her passions with single-minded determination. Victor's pre-recorded voice intoned over footage of her leaving Alexander's studio. Her commitment to the arts has taken her to unexpected places. Melanie's fingers gripped her champagne glass with white-knuckled tension. Guests remained oblivious, seeing only a touching tribute, while she witnessed the systematic dismantling of her deception. After the video, Victor rose to make a final toast. Many of you have asked the secret to 15 years of marriage, he began, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Melanie. The answer is simple, complete transparency. Melanie and I have no secrets from each other. Isn't that right, darling? She lifted her glass mechanically. None whatsoever. Later, as guests began departing, Natalie approached her parents. That was beautiful, Dad, she said, hugging him before turning to Melanie. Mom, are you feeling okay? You look pale. Just tired, sweetheart, Melanie replied. Victor smoothly interceded. Your mother's had a long day preparing everything. Perhaps you could drive her home? I need to stay and handle a few last details. Once they left, Victor summoned Mitchell to his side. Status. Dunleavy's being processed downtown, the investigator reported. The search warrant is being executed at his studio now, and the locks at your house have been changed as requested. Excellent. What about our secondary target? Kessler's received the documents. He's reviewing them tonight. Victor nodded. Stay with him. I want to know the moment he realizes his position. The drive home that night was silent. Victor had arranged for Natalie to take Melanie home and stay with her, ensuring no immediate confrontation. This gave him time to implement the next phase. At midnight, He arrived at their Sudbury mansion to find Melanie waiting in the foyer alone. "Where's Natalie?" he asked. "Asleep," Melanie replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I didn't want to involve her in whatever scene you're planning." "No scene," Victor said, removing his coat. "Just consequences." "You've obviously been planning this for some time," she observed. "Very thorough." "Unlike you," he countered. "You left digital footprints everywhere. Amateur mistakes." Her jaw tightened. "What happens now?" "Now you leave. Tonight. Take personal items only." He handed her an envelope. "Inside you'll find divorce papers already filed with the court, a cashier's check for $50,000, and a one-way ticket to Chicago departing tomorrow morning." "Chicago? There's nothing for me in Chicago." "Precisely," Victor replied. "You'll establish residence there for the divorce proceedings. The address is arranged. You'll receive a monthly stipend, generous by most standards, though certainly not what you'd hope to steal. And if I fight this, then instead of fraud charges against Alexander, they become conspiracy charges against both of you. Instead of a quiet divorce, it becomes a public scandal. Instead of $50,000, you get nothing." Melanie studied him, recognition dawning. "You're enjoying this." "I'm simply conducting business," he corrected. "Calculating returns on a failed investment." "What about Connor?" "Natalie?" "They remain with me," Victor stated flatly. "You'll have supervised visitation after the divorce is finalized. Any attempt to contact them outside those parameters will result in immediate termination of your stipend." "You can't keep me from my children," she protested. "Actually, I can." Victor removed another document from his pocket. "Sworn affidavits from 3 of Connor's teachers regarding your absence from school functions. Records showing you missed Natalie's presentation while meeting Alexander. Credit card statements placing you at hotels during family emergencies. That's manipulation, not evidence. It's pattern establishment," he corrected, "and quite effective in family court." Melanie's composure finally cracked. "They'll hate you when they learn the truth." "What truth would that be?" Victor asked mildly. "That their mother chose an affair over their welfare? That she conspired with my business rival? That she planned to disappear with millions, leaving them behind?" "You ruthless bastard," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed simply. "I am. A fact you seem to have forgotten." He checked his watch. "You have until 6 a.m. to pack and leave. A car will be waiting." As he turned to go, she called after him. "You think you've won, but you haven't. Alexander and I." "Alexander," Victor interrupted, "has already accepted a plea deal. In exchange for reduced charges, he's providing evidence against Lawrence Kessler. Your lover values his freedom more than your partnership, it seems." This was a calculated lie. The plea deal was still being negotiated, but the devastation on Melanie's face confirmed it had hit its mark. "Good night, Melanie," Victor said, heading up the stairs. "Do try to be quiet while packing. The children need their rest." The next morning, Victor woke Connor and Natalie himself. "Where's Mom?" Connor asked sleepily. Victor sat on the edge of his son's bed. "Your mother had to leave town unexpectedly. A family emergency with Aunt Pamela. She didn't say goodbye," Connor noted, immediately suspicious. "It happened very late," Victor explained. "She didn't want to wake you. She'll call tonight." Another lie, but a necessary one. Melanie would indeed call. Mitchell would ensure it. But the conversation would be monitored and limited. Over breakfast, Victor received a text from Lawrence Kessler. "We need to meet." Immediately. The second phase was proceeding on schedule. By noon, Victor sat across from his business rival in Kessler's office. "These documents," Kessler began without preamble, sliding a folder across the desk. "Where did you get them?" "Does it matter?" Victor countered. "What matters is what they prove, namely, that your attempted corporate espionage has left evidence significant enough for a federal investigation." Kessler's face flushed. "Dunleavy approached me. I never sought him out. An irrelevant distinction to prosecutors," Victor noted, "but potentially relevant to me. What do you want, Reeves?" Victor smiled thinly. "The Burlington Street properties. All of them. Signed over to my holding company by end of business tomorrow." "That's extortion." "I prefer to call it negotiation," Victor replied. "Alternatively," These documents reached the SEC by morning. Kessler stared at him with naked hatred. The properties are worth 3 times what you offered last year. Yes, Victor agreed. And your freedom is worth considerably more. Choose wisely. When Kessler eventually nodded in defeat, Victor felt no triumph, only the cold satisfaction of inevitability. The pieces were falling precisely where he'd placed them. That evening, as promised, Melanie called to speak with the children. Victor monitored every word, his hand hovering over the disconnect button. "When are you coming home?" Connor asked her. Melanie's voice trembled slightly. "Not for a while, sweetheart. Aunt Pamela needs me here. But what about my game on Saturday?" "I'm sorry," she said. "Your father will be there." Victor always was. After the children went to bed, Victor retreated to his study, reviewing the day's developments. Mitchell reported that Alexander had indeed accepted the plea deal, providing detailed testimony against Kessler. The artist studio had been thoroughly searched, yielding evidence planted weeks ago by Victor's team. Evidence that implicated Melanie far more deeply than reality warranted. Everything was proceeding according to plan, yet Victor felt oddly hollow. Not from doubt, he never doubted, but from a recognition that his revenge, while satisfying, was incomplete. Melanie had shown her true nature, but she still believed she understood the full scope of his response. She didn't. No one ever did. Chapter 6. Shadows and Substrates. 1 week after Melanie's departure, Victor implemented the 3rd phase of his plan. The children had been told their mother was helping a sick relative, a fiction that would soon require expansion. He arranged a family dinner with Boyd and his wife Teresa, knowing information would flow back to Melanie through this channel. "I've been so worried about Melanie," Teresa said over dessert. "Is there any update on Pamela's condition?" Victor sighed heavily, his expression grave. "The doctors aren't optimistic. It's why Melanie's stay has been extended indefinitely." Boyd studied Victor carefully. They hadn't spoken privately since the anniversary party confrontation. "Has anyone else from the family gone to help?" Boyd asked, his question loaded with subtext. Melanie insisted on handling it alone. Victor replied smoothly. "She feels it's complicated enough without adding more people to the situation." After dinner, while Natalie showed Teresa her college portfolio, Boyd cornered Victor in his study. "I know Pamela isn't sick," he said flatly. "What's really happening with my sister?" Victor closed the door. "Your sister is establishing residence in Chicago for divorce proceedings following her affair with Alexander Dunleavy and their conspiracy to defraud me of millions." Boyd flinched. "Does anyone else know?" "No, and they won't, provided Melanie follows the agreement." "This will destroy her," Boyd stated. "She made her choice," Victor countered. "Multiple choices, actually, each one moving her closer to this outcome." Boyd's expression hardened. "She's still my sister, and these are still my terms," Victor replied, his voice cooling. "Unless you'd prefer I pursue criminal charges? The evidence is substantial." The threat hung between them until Boyd looked away. "What do you need from me?" "Continue the story about Pamela's illness. Support whatever narrative Melanie creates during her calls with the children. In exchange, your gambling debts, all of them, disappear permanently." Boyd's face flushed with shame. "You know about those?" "I've always known," Victor said. "Just as I've always known about the money Melanie sent you from our accounts. The difference is I chose not to use that information until now." The next morning, Victor met with his legal team to finalize the divorce strategy. The lawyers expressed concern about potential challenges. Mrs. Reeves could claim coercion regarding the prenuptial amendment, one cautioned. "She could," Victor acknowledged. "But the notary will testify otherwise, as will the witnesses. And by then, the evidence of her conspiracy with Dunleavy will be public record. Still, courts tend to favor mothers in custody disputes." Victor smiled thinly. "Not mothers who abandon their children for lovers and criminal schemes." That afternoon, he received confirmation that Kessler had signed over the Burlington Street properties, prime downtown real estate Victor had coveted for years. The transaction was structured through shell companies. Phase 4 began with a seemingly innocuous call to Detective Cox. I need a favor, Victor said. Something discreet. Of course, Mr. Reeves. I want Dunleavy's studio thoroughly documented before evidence is removed. Every painting, sketch, and document. Especially any works featuring my wife. May I ask why? Insurance, Victor replied simply. The real purpose became clear 3 days later when Melanie's attorney contacted Victor's legal team requesting modifications to the divorce terms. My client finds the financial settlement inadequate given the length of the marriage and her contributions to Mr. Reeves' success. Victor authorized his attorney to present copies of select evidence. Not all, just enough to demonstrate the depth of documentation. Additionally, his lawyer added, we have cataloged extensive artwork by Mr. Dunleavy featuring Mrs. Reeves in compromising positions. Should this proceed to court, these would necessarily become public record. The next day, Melanie's attorney withdrew the objections. At home, Victor maintained perfect normalcy for the children. He attended Connor's baseball games, helped Natalie prepare her college applications, and ensured their routine remained uninterrupted despite their mother's absence. During Melanie's scheduled calls, he monitored every word, though she never deviated from the established narrative. Her voice grew increasingly strained as weeks passed, the isolation in Chicago wearing on her as intended. 2 months after her departure, Victor received an unexpected call from Alexander Dunleavy. We need to talk, the artist said without preamble. I have nothing to discuss with you, Victor replied coldly. It's about Melanie. She's not well. Victor paused. Elaborate. She's talking about exposing everything. Going to the press. She says she'd rather destroy you both than live like this. This development was not entirely unexpected, but its timing was concerning. The divorce wasn't yet finalized. Where is she now? At her apartment. I visited yesterday. I'm still technically on bail. Victor, she's desperate. And why are you telling me this? Victor asked. Your loyalty clearly lies with her. Alexander laughed bitterly. My loyalty is to myself. The plea deal spares me prison, but my career is finished. Galleries won't touch me. I have nothing left to lose. Melanie still does. Victor considered this. Stay away from her. I'll handle it. That evening, after the children were asleep, Victor called Melanie directly for the first time since she'd left. I understand you're planning something unwise, he said when she answered. Her laugh was brittle. Alexander told you. Of course he did. Whatever you're considering will only hurt the children, Victor said calmly. Don't pretend this is about them, she snapped. This has always been about your control, your ego. Perhaps, he conceded, but the consequences remain the same. Expose our situation publicly, and you lose everything, including any relationship with Natalie and Connor. They deserve to know what kind of man their father really is, and what kind of mother abandoned them for an affair. Victor countered. Think carefully, Melanie. You haven't seen a fraction of what I've prepared. The silence stretched between them. I can't live like this, she finally said, her voice breaking. Exiled, monitored, visiting my own children like a stranger. For a moment, something almost like sympathy stirred in Victor. Almost. You created this situation, he reminded her. But I'm not unreasonable. Maintain the established narrative, finalize the divorce without incident, and in 6 months, we could discuss revising the visitation schedule. It was a calculated offer, specific enough to provide hope, vague enough to maintain control. And if I agree, you receive an additional $20,000 per month. The stipend becomes permanent rather than contingent. And I don't release the more explicit evidence to Natalie and Connor when they turn 21. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed his suspicion. Her greatest fear wasn't public exposure, but losing her children's love. You wouldn't, she whispered. I would, he corrected, unless given sufficient reason not to. The next day, Melanie's attorney contacted Victor's legal team to accelerate the divorce proceedings. Phase 4 was complete. That evening, Victor sat in his study reviewing security footage from Melanie's Chicago apartment. Cameras installed before her arrival, monitoring her every move. On screen, she paced her living room, phone to her ear. He's won, Boyd. Her voice came through clearly. For now, Victor smiled. The qualifier was telling. Melanie still harbored hopes of eventual victory. She hadn't yet grasped the fundamental truth. Victor didn't fight battles. He orchestrated surrenders. His phone rang. Natalie, calling from college. "Hey, Dad. I was thinking of visiting Mom next weekend. Is that okay?" Victor stiffened. This was unexpected. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll arrange the flights." After hanging up, he immediately called Mitchell. "I need surveillance increased on my daughter at Wellesley. All communications monitored. Focus on any contact with her mother." "You think Mrs. Reeves is trying to turn her?" Mitchell asked. "I think Melanie understands that Natalie is my weakness," Victor replied. "And desperation breeds creativity." What Melanie didn't understand was that Victor had anticipated this move months ago. Natalie's devices had been compromised long before the anniversary party. Her seemingly spontaneous desire to visit her mother was anything but. Victor opened his laptop and reviewed recent exchanges between mother and daughter. Melanie had been careful. No direct accusations against Victor, no mention of the true circumstances. Instead, subtle suggestions of loneliness, oblique references to complicated adult situations. He picked up the phone again and dialed Detective Cox. "I need a favor in Chicago." Chapter 7. Fractured Reflections. The Chicago wind cut through Victor's coat as he stood outside the apartment building where Melanie had been living for the past 3 months. He'd arrived ahead of Natalie, whose flight would land in 2 hours, giving him time for this unscheduled confrontation. Security footage had shown Melanie preparing for Natalie's visit with uncharacteristic energy, removing the sparse furnishings Victor had provided, replacing them with tasteful pieces that strained her limited budget, creating an illusion of normalcy. Victor had no intention of allowing that illusion to take root. Using the key he'd retained, he entered her apartment to find her arranging flowers in the living room. She froze at the sight of him. "Victor, what are you doing here?" "Insurance," he replied, closing the door behind him, making certain our agreement remains intact during Natalie's visit. Melanie's face hardened. "I haven't violated any terms." "Not explicitly," he conceded, moving further into the apartment. "But your recent conversations with our daughter contain concerning undertones." Color drained from her face. "You're monitoring my calls with Natalie?" "I'm protecting my interests," he corrected, examining a framed photograph of the family that Melanie had placed prominently on a mantel. "Interesting choice of decor." "She's still my daughter," Melanie said defiantly. "You can control my finances, my reputation, even my freedom, but you can't erase 17 years of motherhood." Victor turned to face her. "I have no intention of erasing anything. I simply ensure that history is recorded accurately." "Is that what this is? Historical preservation?" She laughed bitterly. "You're punishing me for wanting something of my own." "I'm responding to betrayal," he countered. "There's a difference." Melanie stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Do you know why I chose Alexander? Because with him, I wasn't just an accessory to someone else's success. I wasn't just Victor Reeves' wife or Natalie and Connor's mother. I was Melanie, and now you're neither," Victor observed coldly. A fitting outcome for someone who valued identity over responsibility. Her eyes flashed. "You never loved me. You acquired me, like everything else in your life." "Perhaps," he acknowledged, "but I honored our contract. You didn't." The truth hung between them, stark and irreversible. For 15 years, they'd built a life together, one founded on Victor's terms but sustained by mutual commitment, until Melanie decided the terms no longer suited her. "Natalie will be here soon," Victor continued. "During her visit, you will maintain our established narrative. You will not hint at discord between us. You will not suggest that your extended absence is anything but necessary family support. And if I don't," Victor removed an envelope from his coat. "Then instead of returning to Wellesley, Natalie receives these." He extracted several photographs, images of Melanie and Alexander in intimate moments, along with bank records showing money you diverted from her college fund to finance your affair. Melanie recoiled. "You wouldn't. I've done worse for less," he reminded her. "Don't test me, Melanie." After leaving her apartment, Victor met Detective Cox at a nearby cafe. "Is everything prepared?" he asked. Cox nodded. "The wiretap is active. Recording devices installed in all rooms. We'll have complete coverage of their conversations. And if Melanie attempts to leave with Natalie, officers are positioned to intercept, Cox assured him. Though the tracker on your daughter's phone provides additional security. Victor nodded, satisfied with the arrangements. Keep me updated hourly. Any deviation from protocol, any attempt at disclosure, I want to know immediately. While waiting for Natalie's plane to land, Victor called Connor, who was staying with Boyd and Teresa for the weekend. How's everything, son? Fine, Connor replied, his teenage terseness in full effect. Uncle Boyd's taking me fishing tomorrow. Sounds fun, Victor said, carefully casual. Has your mother called today? Yeah, this morning. She seemed weird. Victor tensed. Weird how? I don't know. Sad, I guess. She kept saying how much she misses us. Asked if we were okay without her. What did you tell her? Connor's voice hardened slightly. That we're fine. That you're taking care of everything. Victor smiled, recognizing the loyalty in his son's response. That's right. We're managing just fine. After hanging up, Victor received a text from Mitchell. Natalie landed. En route to apartment now. For the next 36 hours, Victor remained in his hotel room, monitoring transcripts of conversations between mother and daughter. Melanie adhered to their agreement, maintaining the fiction of her extended stay. Natalie seemed to accept the explanation, though occasional questions suggested lingering doubt. It's just weird that you can't come home even for weekends, Natalie remarked during dinner their first night. Aunt Pamela needs consistency, Melanie replied. The doctors say routine is crucial for her recovery. Dad seems different without you, Natalie continued. More intense. Your father has always been intense about the things he values, Melanie said carefully. His family most of all. The exchange was a masterclass in controlled conversation, Melanie navigating dangerous waters without triggering Victor's intervention. On Sunday morning, hours before Natalie's departure, Victor received an urgent call from Mitchell. Sir, we have a situation. Mrs. Reeves just received a visitor. Alexander Dunleavy. Victor's grip tightened on his phone. What? He's violating his bail conditions. Yes, sir. And based on their conversation, it appears deliberate. They're planning something. I'm on my way, Victor said, already heading for the door. Have Cox ready to intervene. When he arrived at Melanie's building, he found Detective Cox waiting in the lobby. They're still upstairs, Cox reported. Based on the audio, Dunleavy is trying to convince her daughter that her mother is being forced to stay away from home. Has he mentioned our agreement specifically? Not yet, but he's getting close. Victor's jaw tightened. Arrest him. Now. Violation of bail conditions. And Mrs. Reeves? Leave her to me. They took the elevator to the 5th floor, Cox radioing his officers to position themselves. Outside Melanie's door, they could hear raised voices. Your father is manipulating everything, Alexander was saying. Your mother didn't leave by choice. What are you talking about? Natalie's voice sounded confused, alarmed. There was no sick aunt, Melanie admitted, her voice breaking. Your father forced me to leave after he discovered my relationship with Alexander. Victor nodded to Cox, who signaled his officers. They burst through the door, weapons drawn. Alexander Dunleavy, Cox announced formally, you're under arrest for violation of bail conditions. The scene froze in tableau. Alexander standing beside Melanie, Natalie on the couch, her face a mask of shock. As officers handcuffed Alexander, Natalie's eyes found her father in the doorway. Dad? What's happening? Victor stepped into the apartment, his expression controlled despite the rage building within him. Your mother's friend, Mr. Dunleavy, is not supposed to be here. He's currently awaiting trial for fraud and corporate espionage. Natalie turned to Melanie. Mom? What is he talking about? Before Melanie could respond, Victor continued. I'd hoped to spare you this, Natalie, but it seems your mother has different priorities. Don't, Melanie pleaded. Victor, please. He ignored her. Your mother has been living in Chicago as part of our divorce proceedings, not caring for any sick relative. She chose to leave our family for Mr. Dunleavy, whom she's been involved with for some time. Natalie's expression crumpled. You've been lying to me? Both of you. I wanted to tell you, Melanie insisted, reaching for her daughter. But the terms of our agreement. Agreement? Natalie interrupted, pulling away. What agreement? The one your mother signed after I discovered her affair, Victor explained clinically, along with her plans to abscond with company funds. The terms were clear: maintain the established narrative or face criminal charges. This isn't how I wanted you to find out, Melanie said, tears streaming down her face. How did you want me to find out that my mother abandoned us? Natalie demanded, her voice rising. In a text? A phone call? As officers led Alexander away, Victor placed a hand on Natalie's shoulder. Let's get you back to the hotel. Your flight to Boston leaves in a few hours. No, she shrugged off his touch. I want to know everything. Right now. For the next hour, in Melanie's sparse living room, the truth unraveled in all its ugly complexity. Victor presented selected evidence of Melanie's betrayal: text messages, hotel receipts, financial transfers. He carefully omitted his own manipulations, presenting himself as the wronged party who had tried to protect his children from painful truths. Melanie attempted to counter with her own version, acknowledging the affair but highlighting Victor's controlling nature, the suffocation she'd felt in their marriage. He orchestrated everything, she insisted. The timing, the evidence, all of it designed for maximum damage. Because you gave me cause, Victor replied evenly. Everything that's happened is the direct result of your choices, Melanie. By the time they finished, Natalie sat rigidly between her parents, her face tear-streaked but composed. I want to go home, she said finally. Not to the hotel, not to Boston. Home to Sudbury. Victor nodded. I'll arrange it. On the private flight back to Massachusetts, Natalie remained silent, staring out the window. Victor respected her space, reviewing work documents until she finally spoke. Did you ever love her? He looked up, considering the question carefully. I believed I did. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have, he replied honestly. Your mother was everything I thought I wanted. Until she wasn't. Natalie studied him. You're not even angry, are you? Not really. It's like you've been playing chess the whole time. Victor set his papers aside. Anger is unproductive. I prefer resolution. Is that what this is? Resolution? It's justice, he corrected. Actions have consequences. Your mother chose her path, knowing the risks. Natalie shook her head. It's punishment, Dad. Don't pretend it's anything else. When they landed, Natalie asked to be taken directly to Boyd's house rather than home. I need to see Connor, she explained. He deserves to hear this from me, not from strangers. Victor agreed, respecting her decision while recognizing its implications. The controlled narrative he'd maintained was unraveling. Within hours, both children would know the truth, or at least the version of truth he'd allowed to emerge. That night, alone in his study, Victor received a call from Boyd. The kids are staying with us tonight, his brother-in-law said without preamble. They need space to process. Understandable, Victor replied. How much does Connor know? Everything Natalie knows, Boyd said, which I suspect isn't actually everything. Victor ignored the implication. Tell them I'm here when they're ready to talk. After hanging up, he called Mitchell. I need you to monitor Boyd's house. All communications, movements. Are you expecting problems, sir? I'm insuring against them, Victor corrected. Now that the children know a version of the truth, Melanie may attempt direct contact. As midnight approached, Victor stood at his study window, contemplating the accelerated timeline. The controlled dismantling of Melanie's life had been disrupted, forcing adaptations to his strategy. Not ideal, but manageable. His phone chimed with a text from Detective Cox, Dunleavy talking. Claims evidence against him was planted. Requesting deal for full disclosure. Victor smiled thinly. Let him talk. The evidence trail had been constructed too carefully, corroborated too thoroughly. Alexander's desperate accusations would only appear self-serving. Another text arrived, this one from a number he didn't recognize. When he opened it, his blood chilled. I know what you did to Frank Donovan. Proof arriving tomorrow. A friend. Frank Donovan. The name Victor had buried a decade ago. The contractor who disappeared after threatening to expose corners cut on Victor's earliest development projects. The man whose family still believed he'd abandoned them for parts unknown. Victor stared at the message, an unfamiliar sensation coursing through him. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Someone else had been playing chess all along. Chapter 8. Tectonic Shifts. By Monday morning, Victor had identified the source of the mysterious text, a burner phone purchased in Chicago 3 days earlier. The timing suggested Melanie's involvement, but the reference to Frank Donovan indicated deeper research. Someone had been digging into Victor's past. Someone with resources and motivation. He arrived at his office earlier than usual, instructing his security team to intensify surveillance on Melanie, Alexander, and Lawrence Kessler. Any of them might have orchestrated this countermove. Denise greeted him with her usual efficiency. "Mr. Reeves, your 9 o'clock with the Burlington Street investors is confirmed. Also, you have a package that arrived by courier this morning." Victor froze. "What kind of package?" "Just a large envelope. I've placed it on your desk with the morning mail." Inside his office, Victor examined the unmarked manila envelope without touching it. Standard size, no visible irregularities. After donning gloves, he carefully opened it to find a USB drive and a single sheet of paper bearing one sentence. "The past doesn't stay buried." He plugged the drive into an isolated laptop kept specifically for security risks. It contained a single video file, security footage from a construction site dated September 17, 2013, the night Frank Donovan disappeared. Victor watched with growing tension as the grainy footage showed him meeting Donovan near an excavated foundation. Their argument was inaudible but clearly heated. Then, the damning moment, Donovan turning to leave, Victor grabbing his shoulder, the struggle that sent Donovan tumbling backward into the concrete-lined pit. The footage ended there, showing neither Victor's panicked descent into the pit nor his discovery that Donovan had broken his neck in the fall. It didn't show Victor's decision to conceal the body within the foundation before concrete was poured the next morning. The evidence was both compelling and incomplete, enough to raise serious questions, but not enough to prove murder. Still, even the suggestion would be devastating to everything Victor had built. He destroyed the drive immediately, crushing it before burning the components. The question remained, who possessed the original footage, and what did they want? His phone rang. "Natalie. Dad, can we talk? Connor and I are ready to come home." "Of course," he replied, maintaining his composure despite the threat hanging over him. "I'll send a car right away." While waiting for his children, Victor initiated containment protocols. He called his head of security, authorized unlimited resources to identify the source of the footage, and instructed his legal team to prepare responses to potential accusations regarding Donovan's disappearance. By noon, Natalie and Connor were seated across from him in the family room, their expressions reflecting different aspects of the same trauma. Natalie's eyes showing betrayal, Connor's anger. "I want to hear your side," Natalie began. "The whole truth." Victor chose his words carefully. "Your mother and I have had problems for some time. She found comfort with someone else. Someone who encouraged her to take actions that would have harmed our family financially and legally. So you exiled her," Connor stated flatly. "Cut her off from everything." "I protected what was ours," Victor corrected, "including your futures." "By lying to us," Natalie countered. "By shielding you," he insisted, "until I could find a way to explain the situation without destroying your relationship with your mother." Connor's jaw tightened. "She abandoned us. What relationship is there to destroy?" "She didn't abandon you," Victor said, surprising himself with this moment of fairness toward Melanie. "She made poor choices regarding our marriage, but she never stopped loving you." The concession was calculated, a demonstration of reasonableness that would contrast with whatever accusations might soon emerge against him. "I want to see her," Connor announced suddenly. "In person, not these stupid monitored phone calls." Victor nodded. "That can be arranged. Without you controlling everything," Natalie added. "An actual conversation without scripts or surveillance." This presented complications, but refusing would only deepen their suspicions. "I'll make the arrangements." After the children retreated to their rooms, Victor received another text from the unknown number. "The Donovan footage is merely a sample. Meet to discuss terms. Pier 14, midnight. An obvious trap," but unavoidable. Whatever leverage this unknown adversary possessed, Victor needed to assess it directly. He spent the afternoon preparing, reviewing security measures at his home, ensuring the children would remain safe during his absence, and arranging discreet backup for the meeting. At 6 p.m., Mitchell called with news. "We've traced recent communications between Mrs. Reeves and Lawrence Kessler," he reported. "Multiple calls in the past week, including a meeting yesterday. The alliance made strategic sense. Both have been damaged by Victor's machinations. Together, they might have resources to threaten his empire. Continue monitoring," Victor instructed, "and place additional surveillance on Kessler's properties." At 11:30 p.m., Victor arrived near Pier 14, instructing his security team to maintain distance. The industrial waterfront was deserted, illuminated only by scattered security lights. Precisely at midnight, a figure emerged from shadows at the pier's end, a woman, her face obscured. As Victor approached cautiously, recognition dawned. Not Melanie, not one of Kessler's associates. Pamela Porter, Melanie's supposedly ill sister. "Hello, Victor," she said, her voice carrying on the cold air. "Thank you for coming." "Pamela," he acknowledged. "I assumed the fiction of your illness was convenient for multiple purposes." She smiled thinly. "My sister needed an alibi. I needed time to research your vulnerabilities." "And now you believe you've found one," Victor noted. "The Donovan matter, among others," she confirmed. "I've spent months compiling evidence of your more questionable business practices. Donovan is merely the most dramatic example." Victor studied her with new respect. While he'd focused on Melanie, Alexander, and Kessler, this overlooked sister had been methodically building a case against him. "What do you want?" he asked directly. "Justice for my sister," Pamela replied. "The divorce agreement rewritten on fair terms. Full restoration of her parental rights. No further interference in her life. Or the evidence goes to the authorities. All of it." Victor considered his options carefully. "The Donovan footage is circumstantial at best. An unfortunate accident that I handled poorly, not murder. Perhaps," Pamela conceded. "But combined with documented safety violations at 3 other development sites, financial irregularities in city contract bids, and your systematic harassment of Melanie since your separation, it creates a compelling narrative." "You've been thorough," Victor acknowledged. "I learned from watching you," she countered. "How you dismantled my sister's life piece by piece. The same meticulous attention to detail, just without your resources. And if I agree to your terms, what guarantee do I have that this evidence won't emerge later?" Pamela removed an envelope from her coat. "A contract, drafted by my attorney. It establishes a trust that holds all evidence to be destroyed upon fulfillment of the specified conditions." Victor took the envelope without opening it. "I'll need time to review this." 24 hours, Pamela stated firmly. "After that, everything goes to the district attorney." As they parted ways, Victor felt a grudging admiration for this unexpected adversary. She had identified his vulnerability with precision, not his business empire or even his freedom, but his carefully cultivated legacy. The public exposure of Frank Donovan's death would irreparably taint everything he'd built. Back home, Victor reviewed the contract with cold calculation. The terms were straightforward. Melanie would receive 30% of their marital assets, unrestricted visitation with the children, and complete autonomy in her professional life. In exchange, all evidence of Victor's past transgressions would be sealed permanently. He called Mitchell. "I need complete information on Pamela Porter's movements for the past 6 months. Every meeting, every call, every financial transaction. Do we consider her hostile?" Mitchell asked. "Extremely," Victor confirmed, "and more dangerous than her sister ever was." Throughout the night, Victor formulated countermeasures. By dawn, he developed a dual strategy, appearing to negotiate while systematically undermining Pamela's position. His first call was to Boyd. "I need your help with Pamela," he said without preamble. "My wife's sister?" Boyd asked, confusion evident. "What about her?" "She's inserted herself into the situation between Melanie and me. I need to understand her vulnerabilities." Boyd hesitated. "Pamela has always been protective of Melanie, even as children. That's not what I'm asking, Victor pressed. I need leverage. Jesus, Victor, Boyd said, audibly uncomfortable. Haven't you done enough? This isn't about punishment anymore, Victor explained. It's about protection, mine and the children's. After further persuasion, Boyd reluctantly revealed what he knew. Pamela's history of depression, her strained marriage to a commodities trader, her fierce loyalty to Melanie that sometimes bordered on obsession. Victor's next call was to Detective Cox, instructing him to investigate Pamela's financial records for irregularities. By noon, the first results arrived. Pamela had withdrawn substantial sums from her retirement accounts over the past 6 months, presumably to finance her investigation into Victor's past. More significantly, Mitchell discovered that Pamela had been consulting with Lawrence Kessler for weeks. The business rival had provided both funding and connections to former employees from Victor's company, employees with knowledge of the Donovan situation. The alliance confirmed Victor's suspicion. This wasn't merely about justice for Melanie. It was a coordinated attack on everything he'd built. At 3 p.m., Victor contacted Pamela. I've reviewed your proposal. We should discuss modifications. There are no modifications, she replied firmly. Those are the terms. Then you should know that I've identified your collaborators, Victor countered, including Lawrence Kessler. His involvement transforms this from a family matter into corporate espionage. A pause. That's irrelevant to our agreement. On the contrary, Victor said smoothly, it's highly relevant to my response. If Kessler is involved, this isn't about Melanie's welfare. It's about dismantling my company. The terms remain unchanged, Pamela insisted. Midnight tonight. After hanging up, Victor accelerated his countermeasures. He instructed his legal team to file preemptive motions regarding potential slander and corporate espionage. He authorized security protocols that would immediately lock down all company servers if allegations became public. Most crucially, he contacted 3 board members of Kessler's company, revealing evidence of their CEO's involvement in potential blackmail and suggesting this reckless behavior warranted review of his leadership. By evening, Victor received confirmation that Kessler had been called to an emergency board meeting. The pressure was beginning to fracture the alliance against him. At 10 p.m., with 2 hours remaining before Pamela's deadline, Victor received an unexpected visitor, Alexander Dunleavy. Your security let me through, the artist explained, standing uncomfortably in Victor's foyer. I told them it was urgent. Indeed, Victor studied him coldly. What could possibly be urgent between us? Pamela Porter, Alexander said simply. She's unstable. This vendetta against you, it's gone beyond helping Melanie. Victor's interest sharpened. Explain. She's not just gathering evidence. She's manufacturing it, pressuring former employees to corroborate stories that aren't entirely true, editing surveillance footage. Why are you telling me this? Victor asked, suspicion evident. Alexander looked away. Because I still care about Melanie. And this path Pamela's on, it doesn't end well for anyone. Including you, Victor noted. If falsified evidence is presented to authorities, your testimony becomes compromised. There's that too, Alexander admitted. I've made enough mistakes. I don't need perjury added to the list. Victor considered this unexpected ally carefully. What exactly has Pamela altered? The Donovan footage. The original showed the fall clearly as an accident. The version she's prepared to release has been edited to appear more deliberate. This information changed everything. If Pamela was manipulating evidence, her entire case could collapse under scrutiny. I need proof of this tampering, Victor stated. Alexander nodded. I can get it, but I want something in return. Of course you do, Victor said dryly. Drop the additional charges against me. Let me plead to the minimal fraud count, serve my time, and start over somewhere else. The request was reasonable, considering the value of the information. Agreed, provided the evidence is conclusive. After Alexander left, Victor called his security team. I want Pamela Porter under surveillance immediately. If she attempts to contact any media or law enforcement, intercept her. At 11:30 p.m., with 30 minutes remaining before the deadline, Victor received the proof he needed. Footage from Alexander's phone showing Pamela directing a video technician to alter the Donovan surveillance video, specifically requesting that Victor's gestures be made to appear more aggressive. Victor immediately called Detective Cox, forwarding the evidence of tampering. This constitutes attempted blackmail and falsification of evidence, he explained. I want her arrested tonight. On your word alone? Cox asked hesitantly. On the evidence I've provided, Victor corrected. And there's more. Financial records showing payments to former employees for false testimony. Conspiracy with Lawrence Kessler to damage my company through fraudulent claims. Cox sighed. I'll need more than allegations, Mr. Reeves. You'll have them within the hour, Victor promised. At midnight, instead of meeting Pamela as arranged, Victor watched from his home security center as police officers approached her hotel room. The expression on her face when they handcuffed her, shock dissolving into rage, confirmed what Victor had suspected. She had underestimated him, just as Melanie had. By morning, the situation had transformed entirely. Pamela faced serious charges of evidence tampering and attempted extortion. Lawrence Kessler had been suspended by his board pending investigation. Alexander had provided a comprehensive statement detailing the conspiracy against Victor. Most significantly, Melanie had called Victor directly, her voice hollow with defeat. What have you done to my sister? I've responded to criminal actions appropriately, he replied evenly. Just as I did with you. This will never end. Will it? She asked quietly. You need to destroy everyone who challenges you. It could end, Victor suggested, with a revised agreement. One that allows you access to the children while ensuring certain protections for me. The silence stretched between them. What kind of protections? She finally asked. A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Surrender of all materials related to my business practices. Permanent severance of your relationship with Alexander Dunleavy. Another long pause. And in return, 30% of our marital assets, as Pamela requested. Unrestricted visitation with the children. Your professional autonomy restored. Why now? Melanie questioned. After everything you've done to isolate me? Victor considered his answer carefully. Because the children know enough truth now that continued deception serves no purpose. And because I prefer resolution to perpetual conflict. It wasn't the complete answer. The full truth was more complex. Victor had recognized that maintaining total control over Melanie had become more costly than allowing her constrained freedom. Like any shrewd businessman, he adapted to changing conditions. I'll consider it, Melanie said finally. After hanging up, Victor turned his attention to removing all traces of the Donovan evidence. The original footage was secured. Witnesses had been discredited through Pamela's tampering. The threat was contained. Yet something unfamiliar lingered in Victor's thoughts. Not regret. He never permitted himself that luxury. Perhaps recognition that the victory felt hollow compared to the damage inflicted on his family. His phone rang again. Natalie. I heard about Aunt Pamela, she said. Connor's upset. She made poor choices, Victor replied. Like your mother. Like you, Natalie countered. I'm not blind, Dad. I see what you've done. To all of them. The challenge in her voice was new, his daughter developing teeth. What I've done, Victor said carefully, is protect what matters. At what cost? She asked. Mom's gone. Aunt Pamela's arrested. Alexander's career is destroyed. Is that worth it? Victor considered his daughter's question with uncharacteristic introspection. They chose their paths. And you chose yours, Natalie said softly. I just hope you don't expect us to choose it too. After hanging up, Victor stood at his study window, watching snow begin to fall again. The symmetry wasn't lost on him. Another winter, another reshaping of his family's landscape. He had won, as he always did. Yet his children's perception of him had fundamentally changed. They'd glimpsed the man behind the father, the ruthlessness he'd always hidden from them. That night, Victor made additions to his contingency journal. This time, the contingency wasn't for business disaster or legal trouble. It was for something he'd never previously considered. The possibility of losing his children's loyalty entirely. Chapter 9. Scorched Foundations. 6 months after Pamela's arrest, Victor sat alone in his study reviewing final divorce documents. The settlement had been negotiated exactly as he'd outlined to Melanie. 30% of assets in exchange for comprehensive non-disclosure. Outside, summer had transformed the Sudbury property. Through the window, Victor could see Connor practicing batting in the yard, his movements precise and controlled. The boy had changed since learning the truth. Harder, more reserved, less willing to accept Victor's explanations at face value. Natalie had changed too. Now in her second year at Wellesley, she visited less frequently, her conversations with Victor increasingly careful, as though mapping dangerous terrain. She maintained contact with Melanie despite Victor's subtle discouragement, sometimes taking Connor for authorized visits. Victor signed the final page of the divorce agreement, noting the elegance of its terms. Melanie would receive financial freedom without access to company information. The children would maintain relationships with both parents without being forced to choose sides. The public narrative would remain controlled, an amicable separation rather than bitter betrayal. All his objectives met. A perfect strategic outcome. Yet Victor felt no satisfaction as he slid the documents into their envelope. The victory had come at unexpected cost. Not financial or legal, but something more fundamental. Something he hadn't properly valued in his calculations. His phone chimed with a text from Mitchell. Mrs. Reeves has received the Burlington Gallery offer as arranged. Another component of Victor's resolution, ensuring Melanie received a prestigious curatorial position through intermediaries she wouldn't recognize as his. Not charity, but strategic placement. Victor preferred keeping all relevant parties within his sphere of influence, even after formal separation. He was reviewing quarterly projections when Natalie arrived unexpectedly, letting herself in with her key. "Dad, you here?" In the study, he called, closing his laptop. She entered carrying a small box, her expression guarded. At 20, she had fully shed her adolescence, her features settling into a striking resemblance to Melanie's, though her calculating gaze was unmistakably Victor's. "I found something at Mom's new place," she said without preamble. "Something you should see." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Natalie opened the box and removed a familiar leather journal. This was in her storage unit. "It's yours, isn't it?" Victor froze, recognizing his contingency journal, the one containing detailed plans for various disasters, including corporate sabotage, political damage control, and yes, protocols for handling Frank Donovan's accidental death. "Where did she get this?" he asked carefully. "She said it was in your closet. She took it before leaving, thinking it might contain financial information." Natalie's eyes held his. "I read it, Dad." Victor maintained his composure through decades of practice control. "And Donovan," she said simply, "the contractor who disappeared. You wrote about it in detail." "A contingency plan," Victor countered smoothly. "I developed them for all possible scenarios, including false accusations." "The plan was created before he disappeared," Natalie pointed out, "and it describes exactly what happened afterward." Victor assessed his options rapidly. Denial would insult Natalie's intelligence. Full confession would be legally dangerous. Partial truth might preserve what remained of their relationship. "Donovan's death was an accident," he said finally. "My response to it was professionally calculated rather than morally sound." "You concealed a man's death," Natalie stated flatly. "Left his family wondering for years." "Yes," Victor acknowledged, seeing no benefit in further deception. "I made a decision based on protecting what I'd built, for myself and eventually for you and Connor." Natalie set the journal on his desk. "Mom doesn't know what's in here. She never read it, but I did." The significance settled between them. Natalie had discovered damning evidence against her father, but chosen not to share it with Melanie, who could have used it in their divorce negotiations. "Why bring it to me?" Victor asked. "Because I need to understand," she replied, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Not just what you did, but who you are. The man who raised me to believe in honesty while building his life on calculated deceptions." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter. The moment required absolute precision. Not manipulation, but genuine connection, something he'd rarely prioritized. "I'm exactly who I've always been, Natalie. Someone who identifies objectives and achieves them, through whatever means necessary. He paused. The difference is that you now see methods previously hidden from you. Methods, she repeated incredulously. Is that what you call destroying Mom? Or what happened to Donovan? I call them necessary responses to threats, Victor stated calmly. Your mother conspired with Alexander and Kessler to take everything. Not just money, but you and Connor as well. Donovan threatened projects that employed hundreds and supported your future. So the ends justify any means? Natalie challenged. Not any means, Victor corrected. Calculated ones. Proportional response. Natalie laughed bitterly. There is nothing proportional about what you did to Mom. You systematically dismantled her life piece by piece. And she systematically planned to dismantle mine, Victor countered. The difference is that I was better at it. They regarded each other in tense silence, the gulf between them wider than the physical distance across his desk. Connor deserves to know, Natalie finally said. Know what? That his father protects what's his. Victor's voice hardened slightly. That betrayal has consequences? That the moral absolutes you've taught us are flexible when applied to yourself, she clarified. Victor considered this criticism with surprising objectivity. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps his greatest deception had been portraying himself as something other than what he was, a man who valued results above principles when necessary. What do you want from me, Natalie? He asked directly. Acknowledgement, she replied. That what you did went beyond protection into vengeance. That you enjoyed watching Mom suffer. The accusation struck with unexpected force because it contained truth Victor rarely acknowledged, even to himself. There had been satisfaction in Melanie's systematic downfall. Not just strategic accomplishment, but emotional gratification. Perhaps, he conceded finally. Does that change anything? It changes how I see you, Natalie said quietly. And it changes what I'll tell Connor. Victor tensed. What exactly do you intend to tell him? The truth. That you're brilliant and protective and sometimes ruthless. That Mom made terrible choices, but didn't deserve everything that happened afterward. She met his gaze steadily. That we should love you without idealizing you. The assessment was fair, more fair than Victor might have expected given what Natalie had discovered. He recognized in her something valuable, the ability to see clearly without allowing emotion to distort judgment. His strategic mind with perhaps a measure of compassion he'd never cultivated. In the journal, he asked, nodding toward it. I'll keep it, Natalie decided. Insurance that you'll allow Mom to rebuild her life without interference. That you'll respect our relationships with her. That whatever scorched earth policy you've implemented stops now. Victor smiled slightly, recognizing the elegant simplicity of her approach. Using leverage to ensure compliance. Perhaps you're more like me than you realize. The difference, Natalie countered, is that I'm using it to protect everyone, not just myself. As she left, taking the damning journal with her, Victor remained at his desk, contemplating this new reality. His daughter had effectively negotiated a détente that his ex-wife, her sister, and his business rivals had failed to achieve. The evening brought Connor home from baseball practice, sweaty and subdued. Victor found him in the kitchen, methodically assembling a protein shake. Good practice? Victor asked. Connor nodded without elaborating. The easy conversation they'd once shared had been another casualty of recent events. Your sister visited earlier, Victor mentioned casually. Connor looked up. Yeah? What did she want? To establish boundaries, Victor replied honestly, and to ensure equilibrium moving forward. Whatever that means, Connor muttered. Victor studied his son, 16 now, physically nearly a man, but emotionally still navigating the collapse of his family structure. It means, Victor explained carefully, that while the divorce is finalized, the aftermath doesn't need to be destructive. Your mother will have her gallery position. You and Natalie will maintain relationships with both of us. And past conflicts remain in the past. Connor's expression remained skeptical. Until someone crosses you again. The observation was astute. Victor had never been one to forgive transgressions, a trait both children had now recognized. My methods protect what I value, Victor stated. They always have. Including us? Connor asked, surprising Victor with his directness. Especially you, Victor confirmed. Everything I've done has been to secure your future. Connor considered this. Mom says the same thing about leaving, that she needed to find herself so she could be a better mother. And do you believe her? Victor asked neutrally. I believe you both believe your own stories, Connor replied with unexpected wisdom. I'm just not sure either of you considered what we needed. The assessment landed with precision. In all his meticulous planning, Victor had calculated his children's financial needs, educational requirements, and social development. He had not, perhaps, adequately valued their emotional well-being during his campaign against Melanie. Fair criticism, Victor acknowledged, earning a surprised glance from his son. Tactical adjustments may be warranted moving forward. Connor almost smiled at the corporate phrasing. That's dad speak for I'll try to do better, right? Accurate translation, Victor confirmed, allowing a rare moment of self-deprecation. That night, alone in his study, Victor reviewed the developments of the past 6 months with clinical detachment. Melanie had been contained without being destroyed. Pamela had accepted a plea deal that kept her out of prison, but thoroughly discredited. Alexander had pled guilty to reduced charges and would serve minimal time before relocating overseas. Lawrence Kessler had been removed as CEO by his board, his reputation permanently damaged. All threats neutralized, all objectives achieved. Yet Victor's most valuable assets, his children's trust, had been significantly depleted. He opened his contingency journal, the replacement copy he'd created after Natalie took the original, and began a new entry, Restoration of Filial Relations. The title felt strange, reducing family bonds to strategic objectives, but it was the framework Victor understood best. As he wrote, his phone chimed with a text from Melanie. Sign the papers. It's done. Victor stared at the message, recognizing its finality. 15 years of marriage concluded with digital brevity. He considered possible responses, cold acknowledgement, subtle reminder of victory, professional cordiality. None seemed adequate. Finally, he typed, "The Burlington position suits you. The children will benefit from your professional stability." Her reply came quickly. "Was that your doing?" "Doesn't matter," he responded. After a long pause, "I suppose not. The outcome benefits us all." Victor set down his phone, contemplating the exchange. They had reached an equilibrium of sorts. Not peace or reconciliation, but a sustainable arrangement that protected what both valued most. The next morning brought news that Natalie had arranged for Connor to spend the weekend at Melanie's new apartment, the first unsupervised visit since the separation. Victor received this information without objection, recognizing it as implementation of the boundaries Natalie had established. When Connor left Friday afternoon, duffel bag over his shoulder, Victor walked him to the car. "Call if you need anything," he said simply. Connor nodded. "I will." Then, surprisingly, "You're not going to warn me about what I might say to Mom? Or give me a script?" "No," Victor replied. "I trust your judgment." Something shifted in Connor's expression, a slight easing of tension, a hint of the openness that had characterized their relationship before recent events. "That's new," he observed. "Tactical adjustment," Victor responded, echoing their earlier conversation. As the car pulled away, Victor returned to his study to finalize acquisition documents for Lawrence Kessler's former company, a hostile takeover facilitated by the former CEO's disgrace. The victory would add significantly to Victor's holdings while eliminating a longtime rival. He should have felt complete satisfaction. All opponents vanquished, all assets secured, even his children's relationships partially salvaged through strategic concessions. Instead, Victor found himself contemplating Natalie's words from the previous day. "You enjoyed watching Mom suffer." The accusation contained undeniable truth. Beyond strategic necessity, beyond proportional response, there had been something darker in his systematic dismantling of Melanie's life, a cold gratification in her downfall that revealed something fundamental about himself. Not regret. Victor Reeves did not indulge in regret, but perhaps recognition that the traits that built his empire might destroy his legacy if left unchecked. His phone rang. Natalie again. "Connor arrived safely," she reported. "Mom's place looks nice." Smaller, obviously, but she's made it work. Good, Victor replied neutrally. Is there anything else? A pause. Yes. Thank you for not interfering with this visit. It matters to Connor. And to me. The gratitude was unexpected, acknowledgement of his restraint rather than criticism of his previous control. As you said, Victor responded, equilibrium benefits everyone. After hanging up, he returned to his acquisition documents, signing the final pages that would complete his business victory over Kessler. The move would be announced Monday, adding another chapter to Victor Reeves' reputation as a ruthless corporate predator who never forgave enemies or overlooked opportunities. That reputation had served him well in business. But as he looked at photographs of Natalie and Connor on his desk, Victor recognized that the same uncompromising approach had nearly cost him something more valuable than any corporate acquisition. He would not change who he was. Victor Reeves would always be calculating, strategic, and unforgiving toward those who betrayed him. But perhaps, for his children, he could temper justice with something approximating mercy. Not forgiveness, never that, but a cold peace that allowed life to continue on his carefully defined terms. It would have to be enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Brett Dawson adjusted his reading glasses and closed his laptop with a satisfied click. After 15 years as a cybersecurity consultant, he learned to appreciate the quiet moments between contracts. His home office, tucked away in the corner of their suburban Denver house, was his sanctuary, until his wife Sarah burst through the door with that look he'd learned to recognize over their 12 years of marriage. Jessie needs a huge favor, Sarah said, her blonde hair still damp from her morning jog. She has to work a double shift at the hospital, and Ricky's been acting weird lately. She's worried about leaving him alone. Brett set down his coffee mug, studying his wife's concerned expression. Sarah's younger sister Jessie had been raising 14-year-old Ricky alone since her husband died in a construction accident 3 years ago. The kid had been through enough trauma for a lifetime. Define weird, Brett said, already knowing he'd agree to babysit regardless of the answer. Quiet. Secretive. She found him sneaking out last week, but he claimed he was just walking around the neighborhood. Sarah perched on the edge of his desk. You know how Ricky used to be. Always talking, always joking around. Now he barely says 2 words at dinner. Brett had noticed the change too. The lanky teenager with sandy brown hair and his father's easy smile had become withdrawn, jumpy even. At last month's family barbecue, Ricky had spent most of the time on his phone, stepping away whenever anyone approached. I'll keep an eye on him, Brett said, standing to kiss Sarah's forehead. Maybe I can get him to open up. Sometimes kids talk more to uncles than parents. 3 hours later, Brett was questioning that assumption. Ricky sat sprawled across the living room couch, thumbs flying across his phone screen, responding to Brett's attempts at conversation with grunts and shrugs. The kid wore oversized clothes that seemed designed to help him disappear, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he wasn't sleeping well. Your mom says you've been taking walks around the neighborhood. Brett tried again, settling into his recliner with a beer. Mind if I join you sometime? I could use the exercise. Ricky's fingers paused for just a moment before resuming their frantic pace. It's boring. You wouldn't like it. Try me. I'm pretty boring myself these days. That earned him a ghost of a smile before Ricky's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display read, "Do not answer," in bold letters, and the kid's face went pale. Aren't you going to answer that? Brett asked casually, noting how Ricky's hands trembled slightly. It's spam, Ricky muttered, declining the call. Gets tons of them. Brett filed that observation away. In his line of work, he'd learned to spot tells, the micro-expressions that revealed when someone was lying, afraid, or hiding something important. Ricky was doing all three. The phone rang again immediately, same display name. This time, Ricky fumbled with the device, nearly dropping it in his haste to decline the call again. Persistent spammer, Brett observed. Might be worth answering just to tell them to stop calling. Before Ricky could protest, Brett reached over and accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Tell the boy the package is ready. A gravelly male voice said without preamble. He knows the spot. The line went dead. Brett's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral as he watched Ricky's face cycle through panic, fear, and resignation. The kid looked like he might throw up. Ricky, Brett said quietly, his voice carrying the authority he'd learned during his brief stint in the military before college. We need to talk. Now. Chapter 2. The Web Unravels. Ricky's composure cracked like glass. The teenager who'd been slouching on the couch moments before was now perched on the edge, his whole body coiled with nervous energy. Brett recognized the posture. It was the same stance he'd seen in corporate boardrooms when executives realized their security had been breached. I can't, Ricky whispered, his voice barely audible. You don't understand what they'll do. Brett leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. What who will do? Who was that on the phone? I don't know his real name. Everyone just calls him the conductor. Ricky's hands shook as he ran them through his hair. He finds kids like me, kids whose families need money, who don't have anyone looking out for them. Your mom looks out for you. She works 16-hour shifts just to keep the lights on. Ricky's voice cracked. Do you know what it's like watching your mom choose between groceries and the electric bill? I try to get a job, but nobody hires 14-year-olds for anything that pays real money. Brett's jaw tightened. He'd offered to help Jessie financially before, but she was too proud to accept what she called charity. He'd respected her independence, but now he was seeing the cost of his restraint. So you found another way, Brett said. Ricky nodded miserably. It started small. The conductor said I just had to sit in certain places at certain times. Parks, bus stops, the mall. He called it scouting. Paid me $50 each time just to hang out and text him if I saw anything unusual. Unusual how? Police activity. Security guards paying too much attention to something. Adults who looked like they didn't belong. Ricky's voice grew quieter. I thought I was helping with like insurance fraud or something. Small-time stuff. Brett's cybersecurity instincts were screaming. But it wasn't small time. The packages started 2 months ago. Ricky stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. First time, it was just a backpack. He told me to pick it up from a locker at Union Station and carry it to Washington Park. Someone would find me there and take it. Paid me $200 for 20 minutes of work. Did you look inside? Ricky shook his head. He said curiosity was expensive. That kids who asked too many questions tended to have accidents. The teenager turned from the window, his young face aged by worry. But I started noticing things. The way people looked at me when I was carrying the packages. How they crossed the street or called their kids closer. Whatever's in those bags, Uncle Brett, it's bad. Brett stood up, his mind already working through possibilities. In his years fighting cybercrime, he'd seen how criminals exploited vulnerable people, especially kids. They were perfect mules, sympathetic if caught, expendable if things went wrong. Have you delivered a package recently? Brett asked. Last week. But this call. Ricky's voice trailed off. He's never called when I was with family before. He usually texts. This feels different. Brett's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Working late. Order pizza for dinner. Love you both. Perfect timing. They had privacy, and Brett had a feeling they were going to need it. Ricky, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Brett said, moving to his home office and pulling out a secure laptop. What you're describing sounds like a professional operation. These people aren't playing games, and they sure as hell don't care about you or your mom. I know that, Ricky said defensively. But what choice do I have? I tried to quit after the last delivery, but the conductor said I was invested now, that I knew too much to just walk away. Brett's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up encrypted communication channels he used for sensitive client work. There's always a choice. But first, I need to know everything. Every location, every person you've seen, every detail you can remember. Can you do that? Ricky nodded, some of the fear leaving his eyes for the first time since the phone call. You really think you can help? Kid, Brett said with a grim smile. I've spent my career hunting people who think they're smarter than the system. Trust me when I say the conductor just made a very big mistake. As Ricky began recounting his experiences, Brett felt the familiar surge of purpose that came with a new case. But this wasn't about corporate data or financial fraud. This was personal. Someone was using his nephew as a pawn in whatever game they were playing, and Brett intended to make sure they regretted that choice. Chapter 3. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. By 10 o'clock that night, Brett had filled 3 legal pads with notes and created a detailed digital map of every location Ricky had mentioned. The pattern that emerged made his blood run cold. "These aren't random drop points," Brett murmured, studying the screen. "Look at this. Every pickup location is within 2 blocks of a school. Every delivery point is in a neighborhood with high poverty rates." Ricky peered over his shoulder, recognizing the map of Denver with growing unease. "What does that mean?" "It means whoever's running this operation is targeting kids and vulnerable communities specifically." Brett's voice carried a dangerous edge. "And that phone call today? That wasn't about a regular delivery. Something's changed." Brett's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Marcus Chun, his former partner from his military intelligence days who now worked private security. Brett had reached out earlier, asking for information on local trafficking operations. "Found your conductor. Real name Norman Rasmussen. Ex-military, dishonorably discharged for running black market operations in Afghanistan. Been operating in Denver for 2 years. Word is he's planning something big. Federal heat's getting intense. So he's liquidating assets and preparing to disappear." Brett read the message twice before the implications hit him. "Ricky, when the conductor talks about the spot, where exactly does he mean?" "The old Riverside Warehouse District. Building 47, 3rd floor. There's a maintenance room where—" Ricky stopped mid-sentence, his face going white. "Oh God, if he's shutting down the operation." "He's eliminating loose ends," Brett finished grimly. "Kids who know too much about his routes, his methods, his organization." The realization hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Brett's mind raced through options, calculating risks and outcomes with the systematic precision that had made him successful in both the military and cybersecurity. "We're calling the police," Ricky said, reaching for his phone. "And tell them what?" Brett asked. "That you've been knowingly participating in criminal activity for months? Even if they believe you, there's no guarantee they can move fast enough to prevent Rasmussen from disappearing, or from taking revenge on you and your mom before he goes." Ricky slumped back onto the couch. "So what do we do?" Brett closed his laptop and turned to face his nephew. "We're going to do what I do best. We're going to hunt a predator. Uncle Brett, this isn't some computer hacker. This guy has killed people. Real people. So have I," Brett said quietly. "Before I became a consultant, I spent 3 years in military intelligence tracking down networks, just like this one. The difference is that back then, I had to follow rules of engagement and chain of command. This time, I don't." Over the next hour, Brett outlined his plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and completely illegal by conventional standards. It was also, he believed, the only way to protect Ricky and other kids caught in Rasmussen's web, while ensuring the man faced real consequences for his crimes. Phase 1, Brett explained, we gather intelligence. I've already started tracking Rasmussen's digital footprint, financial records, communication patterns, known associates. Meanwhile, you're going to help me understand his physical operation. Ow! You're going to make that pickup tomorrow, exactly like he expects. But this time, you won't be alone. Ricky's eyes widened. You want to follow me? I want to map his entire network. Every person involved, every location used, every weak point in his security. Brett's smile was predatory. The conductor thinks he's been careful, but he's made one crucial mistake. What's that? He underestimated the family of one of his victims. As Brett walked Ricky through the details, his phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. By the way, Rasmussen's got federal attention because word is he's branching into something bigger than drugs. Missing persons reports match his operation timeline. Be careful, brother. Brett deleted the message without showing it to Ricky. The kid was scared enough already, and fear could make people unpredictable. But the information confirmed what Brett had already suspected. Norman Rasmussen wasn't just a drug dealer using kids as mules. He was trafficking in human lives, and Ricky's involvement had put him directly in the crosshairs of killer, which meant Brett had approximately 18 hours to turn the tables before his nephew became another statistic. "Get some sleep," Brett told Ricky as he gathered his notes. "Tomorrow we start fighting back." After Ricky went to the guest room, Brett sat alone in his office, staring at Rasmussen's photograph on his computer screen. The man looked unremarkable. Average height, thinning brown hair, the kind of face that blended into crowds. But Brett had learned long ago that the most dangerous predators were often the ones who appeared harmless. He opened a new encrypted file and began typing. Operation Package Delivery Day 1. Norman Rasmussen had spent 2 years believing he was the apex predator in his little ecosystem. Tomorrow, he was going to learn what it felt like to be prey. Chapter 4. The Art of War. Brett was awake at 5 a.m., 3 hours before his usual routine. He'd spent the night analyzing Rasmussen's operation with a methodical precision that had made him one of the military's best intelligence analysts. Now, surrounded by printed maps, surveillance photos from public cameras, and financial records he'd obtained through methods the FBI would definitely frown upon, he felt the familiar calm that came with having a plan. Ricky shuffled into the kitchen at 7, looking like he'd slept about as well as Brett had. "I keep thinking about what you said, about him eliminating loose ends." "That's exactly what I want you thinking about," Brett said, handing him a cup of coffee. "Fear keeps you sharp, but we're not going to let that fear paralyze us." Brett spread a detailed map of the warehouse district across the kitchen table. "According to my research, Rasmussen operates out of Building 47, but he's got safe houses and storage facilities in at least 4 other locations. Classic military cell structure. If one location gets compromised, the others remain operational." "How did you find all this?" "Digital forensics." Brett pointed to a series of red marks on the map. "Financial transactions, utility records, lease agreements." People like Rasmussen think they can hide behind shell companies and cash payments, but every transaction leaves a digital footprint if you know where to look. What Brett didn't mention was that he'd also reached out to 3 other contacts from his military days, men who now worked in the gray areas between legal and necessary. By noon, he'd have surveillance equipment, tactical gear, and, if things went badly, backup that wouldn't ask inconvenient questions about jurisdiction or warrants. "The pickup today," Ricky said, studying the map. "It's at locker 247 in Union Station. But the delivery," he traced a route with his finger. "This is different from before. He wants me to bring it to Riverside Park instead of the warehouse district." Brett felt ice form in his stomach. Riverside Park was isolated, surrounded by dense trees and hills that would muffle sound. It was the perfect place for an execution disguised as a drug deal gone wrong. "Change of plans," Brett said. "You're not making that delivery. But if I don't show up, he'll come looking for you. I'm counting on it." Brett's smile was cold. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to make yourself look like prey. Over the next 2 hours, Brett transformed his suburban home into a command center. He installed temporary security cameras, set up encrypted communication links, and prepared what he euphemistically called defensive measures. If Rasmussen decided to pay the Dawson house a visit, he'd find more than he bargained for. At 11:30, Brett's phone rang. Marcus Chen's voice was tight with concern. "Whatever you're planning, brother, you need to know that Rasmussen's got serious backing." Federal wiretaps picked up chatter about a cleanup operation scheduled for today. Cleanup of what? That's what's got everyone spooked. Could be drugs, could be weapons, could be... Marcus paused. Could be witnesses. Kids who know too much about how he operates. Brett's jaw clenched. How many kids are we talking about? Intel suggests at least a dozen active couriers, probably twice that many who've worked for him over the past 2 years. If he's really planning to disappear, he'd eliminate all of them, Brett finished. "Thanks for the intel, Marcus." "And Marcus? If you don't hear from me by midnight, there's a file on my secure server with everything I've found about this operation. Make sure it gets to the right people. Brett, don't do anything stupid." "Too late for that," Brett said, ending the call. He found Ricky in the living room, staring out the window with the hollow expression of someone who'd realized he was completely out of his depth. The kid looked younger than his 14 years, and Brett felt a surge of protective rage that surprised him with its intensity. "Uncle Brett," Ricky said without turning around, "I need to tell you something about the packages." "What about them?" "The last one I delivered. It wasn't drugs." Ricky's voice was barely a whisper. "When I handed it over, the guy opened it right there. Inside was a phone, a fake ID, and what looked like instructions written in Spanish. The girl who was supposed to get it, she couldn't have been more than 12 years old." Brett's hands slowly curled into fists. "Did you see where they took her?" "North, toward the interstate." Ricky finally turned around, tears streaming down his face. "I've been helping him traffic kids, haven't I? Kids like that little girl. Kids who probably don't even speak English, who have no one to protect them. That ends today," Brett said with quiet conviction. "I promise you, Ricky. Whatever it takes, that ends today." At 12:30 p.m., Brett's doorbell rang. Through the security camera, he saw a delivery truck and a man in brown uniform holding a package. But Brett's trained eye caught the details that would have escaped most people. The delivery man's shoes were military-issue combat boots. His posture was too alert for a routine delivery, and his eyes were constantly scanning for threats. "Expecting a delivery?" the man called out, his voice carrying a slight accent Brett couldn't quite place. "Leave it by the door," Brett replied through the intercom. "Requires signature." Brett smiled grimly. Norman Rasmussen had found him faster than expected, which meant the man was either very good or very desperate. Probably both. "Ricky," Brett called softly, "time to go to your room and stay there, no matter what you hear." As his nephew disappeared down the hallway, Brett checked his weapons and moved toward the front door. The real game was about to begin. Chapter 5. Predator and Prey. The fake delivery man waited exactly 63 seconds before attempting to pick the lock, long enough to seem legitimate to any neighbors who might be watching, short enough to suggest professional training. Brett watched through his hidden cameras as the man worked, noting the efficient movements and specialized tools that confirmed this wasn't some street-level thug. Brett's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have surveillance on your sister-in-law's hospital. Wouldn't want Dr. Hopper to have an accident during her shift. Bring the boy to Riverside Park. 30 minutes. Clever," Brett murmured, forwarding the message to Marcus along with a prearranged code that meant execute contingency plan alpha. Within minutes, Sarah's sister would have discreet but effective protection, whether she knew it or not. The lock clicked open. Brett positioned himself behind the kitchen island, his military-issued sidearm drawn, but concealed. The intruder moved through the house with practiced stealth, clearly familiar with residential layouts and potential hiding spots. "Mr. Dawson," the man called out in that same accented voice. "I think we should talk." "I'm listening," Brett replied, tracking the man's movement by sound. "My employer is a reasonable man. He understands that family loyalty can complicate business relationships." The intruder appeared in the kitchen doorway, tall, lean, with the kind of scars that suggested extensive combat experience. But he's also a practical man. The boy has certain obligations. The boy is 14 years old enough to understand consequences. The man's smile was cold, old enough to make choices. Poor choices, as it turns out. Brett studied his opponent, cataloging weaknesses and advantages. The intruder was armed, shoulder holster under his jacket, but his weapon remained concealed, suggesting he preferred intimidation to immediate violence. That was useful information. "What kind of consequences are we talking about?" Brett asked. "The kind that happen to children who know too much about business operations they shouldn't have been involved in." The man stepped fully into the kitchen, his posture relaxed but ready. "The kind that happen to families who interfere with those business operations. And if I hand over my nephew, then this conversation never happened. Your family continues their normal lives, and everyone goes home happy." Brett nodded thoughtfully. "There's just one problem with that scenario." "What's that?" "I don't negotiate with pedophiles." The man's face darkened. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Mr. Dawson." "Actually, I understand perfectly." Brett's voice carried the authority of someone who'd interrogated war criminals and terrorist operatives. Norman Rasmussen, dishonorably discharged from the 82nd Airborne for black market operations, currently running a trafficking network that specializes in exploiting vulnerable children, planning to liquidate his operation today, which means eliminating witnesses. The intruder's hand moved toward his weapon, but Brett was faster. His own gun appeared with fluid precision, aimed center mass. "I wouldn't," Brett said calmly. "Your employer sent you here to intimidate a suburban consultant. He didn't send you prepared for a firefight with someone who's actually killed people for a living. You're making a mistake." The mistake was made when Rasmussen decided to involve my family. Brett's finger rested lightly on the trigger. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to call your boss and tell him the boy isn't here. Then you're going to walk out of my house and disappear. And if I refuse, then your body will be discovered in about 6 hours after I've had time to properly dispose of it." Brett's smile was genuinely friendly, which somehow made the threat more terrifying. "I've done this before. I'm quite good at it." The intruder studied Brett's face for several long moments, clearly weighing his options. Whatever he saw there convinced him that negotiation was his best choice. "This isn't over," he said, slowly backing toward the front door. "You're absolutely right," Brett agreed. "But when it is over, Norman Rasmussen is going to wish he'd chosen a different line of work." After the man left, Brett immediately moved to execute Phase 2 of his plan. He sent a coded message to Marcus requesting immediate extraction for Jesse from the hospital, then began preparing for what would essentially be a one-man assault on a criminal organization. His phone rang 20 minutes later. The caller ID showed only a block number. "Mr. Dawson," a gravelly voice said without preamble, "I believe you have something that belongs to me. Norman Rasmussen, I presume. You've been busy, haven't you? Background checks, surveillance, intimidating my associates." Rasmussen's voice carried amusement mixed with genuine anger. "Very impressive for a computer geek. I prefer cybersecurity consultant, but I suppose we all have our perspectives." "Here's mine," Rasmussen said, his tone turning deadly serious. "You have 2 hours to deliver the boy to the coordinates I'm about to send you. If you don't, I start killing other children in my organization, one every 30 minutes, until you change your mind." The line went dead, followed immediately by a text with GPS coordinates that Brett recognized as an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of Denver. Brett stared at the message for several seconds, then smiled with genuine appreciation. Rasmussen had just made the classic mistake that had gotten dozens of criminals caught over the years. He'd revealed his primary base of operations while under stress. "Ricky," Brett called out, "pack a bag. We're going to end this." Chapter 6, The Gambit. The abandoned Clearwater Industrial Complex sprawled across 12 acres of rust-stained concrete and broken glass, a monument to Denver's manufacturing past and a perfect hiding place for activities that prefer darkness. Brett parked his Jeep 2 miles away and completed the approach on foot, using skills he'd learned tracking insurgents through Afghan mountains. Through military-grade night vision goggles, he could see the complex was anything but abandoned. Guards with automatic weapons patrolled the perimeter with professional discipline, and multiple vehicles suggested a significant operation. This wasn't just a drug distribution center. It was a fortress. Brett's earpiece crackled with Marcus's voice. "Thermal imaging shows at least 20 hostiles, plus an unknown number of civilians in the main building. You sure about this, brother?" "Positive." Brett adjusted his tactical vest and checked his weapons one final time. "Remember, this isn't a military operation. These people are criminals, not enemy combatants. Priority is civilian rescue, then neutralizing the leadership. And if Rasmussen tries to run, he won't get the chance." What Marcus didn't know, what Brett hadn't told anyone, was that this assault was only the visible part of his plan. For the past 6 hours, while preparing for the physical confrontation, Brett had been conducting a parallel cyber warfare campaign that would soon make running impossible for anyone involved in Rasmussen's organization. Every financial account, every digital communication, every piece of evidence that connected Norman Rasmussen to his trafficking network had been copied, analyzed, and prepared for simultaneous release to federal law enforcement, international human rights organizations, and investigative journalists. Even if Brett didn't survive the next few hours, Rasmussen's empire would collapse. But Brett fully intended to survive, and he intended to make Rasmussen pay personally for every child who'd been hurt by his operation. Movement at the North Entrance, Marcus reported. Looks like they're expecting you. Brett had counted on that. He deliberately made his approach obvious to the perimeter guards, allowing them to report his presence and draw attention to the north side of the complex. Meanwhile, 3 of Marcus's associates were preparing to breach from the south, where thermal imaging showed the highest concentration of potential victims. "Give me 5 minutes, then execute," Brett commanded. He stepped into the open, hands raised, but ready to draw his concealed weapons at the first sign of treachery. 2 guards approached with professional caution, their rifles trained, but not yet firing. "Mr. Dawson," one of them called out. "You're expected." "I'm sure I am." They escorted him through a maze of corridors and abandoned machinery to what had once been the main production floor. The space had been converted into a sophisticated command center, complete with computer workstations, surveillance monitors, and holding areas that made Brett's jaw clench with barely controlled rage. Norman Rasmussen stood in the center of it all, exactly as unremarkable as his photograph suggested. Average height, thinning hair, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. But his eyes held the flat, calculating coldness that Brett recognized from interrogating the worst kind of predators. "Welcome to my kingdom," Rasmussen said with a theatrical gesture. "Impressive, isn't it? 2 years of careful planning, strategic investment, and operational discipline. I've built something special here." "You've built a cancer," Brett replied. "One that's about to be cut out." Rasmussen laughed. Bold words from a man who walked into a building filled with armed professionals. "Tell me, where exactly is my young courier?" "Safe. Far away from here, and far away from you." "I see." Rasmussen nodded to one of his men, who immediately left the room. "Well, then I suppose we'll have to provide alternative motivation." 3 guards entered, escorting a group of children ranging in age from perhaps 10 to 16. Brett's heart hammered against his ribs as he recognized the terror in their eyes. The same expression he'd seen on child soldiers and trafficking victims in war zones. These weren't just couriers, they were prisoners. "Meet some of my other young employees," Rasmussen said casually. "Bright kids, all of them. Quick learners. Unfortunately, they've also learned too much about my operation to simply be released." "Let them go," Brett said, his voice carrying deadly authority. "Your problem is with me, not them." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong." Rasmussen pulled out a pistol and casually aimed it at the nearest child, a girl who couldn't have been older than 12. "My problem is with anyone who threatens my business model. These children represent loose ends that need to be tied up before I relocate my operation." "Relocate where?" "Somewhere with fewer regulations and more realistic attitudes about commerce." Rasmussen's smile was genuinely warm, which somehow made it more horrifying. "Southeast Asia has some interesting opportunities for a man with my particular skill set." Brett calculated angles and distances, weighing the odds of disarming Rasmussen before he could hurt the children. The math wasn't encouraging, but mathematics had never been his only consideration in combat situations. "You know what I find interesting?" Brett said conversationally. "You're talking like a man who thinks he has options, like someone who believes he can walk away from this." "Can't I?" Rasmussen asked. "You're one man with a hero complex, surrounded by my people in my facility. What exactly do you think you can accomplish here?" Brett checked his watch. "In about 30 seconds, you're going to find out." The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the complex in red shadows and revealing a very different tactical situation. The guards who had seemed so professional moments before were now shouting orders and spinning in circles, their night vision destroyed by the sudden transition from bright fluorescence to emergency illumination. Brett moved with the fluid precision of someone who trained for exactly this scenario. His first target was the guard nearest to the children, a knife thrust that severed the carotid artery before the man could scream. His second target was Rasmussen himself, but the criminal had better reflexes than Brett had anticipated. Gunfire erupted throughout the complex as Marcus and his team breached from multiple entry points. Through his earpiece, Brett could hear tactical chatter as his backup systematically dismantled Rasmussen's organization. Children secured. South exit. Marcus reported. Repeat, packages are safe. But Brett's attention was focused on the man in front of him. In the red-tinted darkness, Norman Rasmussen had transformed from a seemingly ordinary criminal into something genuinely dangerous. His movements suggested military training that went far beyond what Brett had discovered in his background research. Impressive, Rasmussen said, circling Brett with predatory grace. But you've made one crucial error in your planning. What's that? You assumed I was the apex predator in this particular food chain. Rasmussen smiled in the dim light. You have no idea who you're really fighting. Chapter 7. The True Enemy. The revelation hit Brett like a physical blow. Rasmussen wasn't the mastermind. He was middle management. Somewhere above him in the organizational hierarchy was someone with enough resources and influence to run a trafficking network across multiple states, possibly multiple countries. Who's pulling your strings, Norman? Brett asked, keeping his weapon trained on the man while his mind raced through the implications. Does it matter? Rasmussen shrugged. You've already committed yourself to this course of action. There's no going back now. The sounds of gunfire from other parts of the complex were dying down, replaced by Marcus's voice in Brett's earpiece. Primary, building secured. We got 12 victims safe, but the computer systems have been wiped remotely. Whoever's running this operation just erased their digital footprint. Brett cursed silently. Professional-grade data destruction suggested resources and sophistication far beyond anything a dishonorably discharged soldier could access independently. The children are safe, Brett said to Rasmussen. That was my primary objective. But you and I still have unfinished business. Actually, we don't. Rasmussen's smile widened. You see, I've been broadcasting our conversation to my superiors. They're quite impressed with your capabilities, Mr. Dawson. So impressed, in fact, that they've made a decision about your future. Brett felt the familiar prickle of danger that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. What kind of decision? The kind that recognizes talent when it sees it. Rasmussen slowly holstered his weapon, a gesture that somehow felt more threatening than keeping it drawn. You've demonstrated exceptional planning, tactical acumen, and a willingness to operate outside legal constraints for the greater good. My employers find those qualities valuable. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice. Join our organization. Help us improve our operational security, and your family lives normal, peaceful lives. Refuse, and Rasmussen gestured around the complex. Well, this was always intended to be a temporary facility anyway. Through his earpiece, Brett heard Marcus. Brett, we've got incoming vehicles. Military-style convoy, moving fast. Whatever you're doing in there, wrap it up. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The remote data wipe, the professional-grade security, the willingness to eliminate an entire operation rather than risk exposure. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise. This was a government operation, or at least one with government protection. Who do you work for? Brett demanded. People who understand that certain services are necessary, even if they can't be officially acknowledged. Rasmussen checked his own watch. People who know that sometimes the only way to catch monsters is to become monsters yourself. You're trafficking children. We're gathering intelligence on trafficking networks by infiltrating them. The children we recruit are assets, not victims. They're helping us identify and eliminate far worse predators. Rasmussen's voice carried the conviction of someone who'd rationalized atrocities in the name of a greater cause. Do you have any idea how many child trafficking networks we've dismantled using information gathered through operations like this one? Brett's finger tightened on his trigger. I don't care about your justifications. Then you're a fool. Rasmussen stepped closer, apparently confident that Brett wouldn't shoot an unarmed man. You think you're saving these children? Within 6 months, half of them will be back on the streets, vulnerable to real predators. At least with us, they had protection, structure, purpose. They had trauma. They had training that will keep them alive in situations you can't imagine. Rasmussen was close enough now that Brett could see the genuine fanaticism in his eyes. Join us, Dawson. Help us do this work properly. Help us save children by using the skills you've already demonstrated. The convoy Marcus had reported was getting closer. Brett could hear heavy engines and the distinctive sound of military vehicles surrounding the complex. Within minutes, he'd be facing professional soldiers with orders to either recruit him or eliminate him. "Last chance," Rasmussen said. "What's your answer?" Brett's response was a knife thrust to the solar plexus, delivered with sufficient force to puncture the heart. Rasmussen's eyes widened in shock and pain before the light faded from them permanently. "My answer," Brett said to the corpse, "is go to hell." He activated his emergency beacon, signaling Marcus and the team to execute their extraction plan. Whatever government agency was behind this operation, they were about to learn that Brett Dawson was not someone who could be recruited, intimidated, or eliminated easily. Through the complex's loudspeaker system, an electronically distorted voice announced, "Mr. Dawson, please remain where you are. Federal agents are incoming to debrief you on this situation." Brett smiled grimly and began moving toward the nearest exit. Federal agents who wiped evidence and eliminated witnesses weren't there to debrief anyone. They were there to clean up loose ends. "Marcus," he said into his microphone, "time to go." "Now." "Roger that." Exfil in 60 seconds. As Brett fought his way through the complex toward the extraction point, he couldn't shake the feeling that Rasmussen had been telling at least partial truth about the nature of his operation. The sophisticated equipment, the professional security, the willingness to sacrifice an entire network rather than risk exposure. These weren't the hallmarks of simple criminals. But whether Rasmussen had been working for the government or against it, the result was the same. Children had been exploited, families had been terrorized, and people like his nephew had been turned into unwilling accomplices in their own victimization. The convoy was breaching the complex's perimeter as Brett reached the extraction point. Through his night vision, he could see Marcus and two other operatives providing covering fire while a helicopter descended toward their position. "Go, go, go," Marcus shouted over the rotor noise. As the helicopter lifted off with its human cargo, Brett looked down at the complex where armed figures were already spreading out to search for survivors. Whatever secrets Norman Rasmussen had taken to his grave, the people who'd employed him were still out there, still operating, still exploiting vulnerable children in the name of whatever cause they believed justified their methods. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. 3 weeks later, Brett sat in his home office reviewing the aftermath of what the Denver police had officially classified as a multi-agency counter-trafficking operation. The public story was sanitized, bureaucratic, and bore little resemblance to what had actually happened at the Clearwater Industrial Complex. According to the official report, federal agents had raided a drug distribution center and rescued 12 minors who were being used as couriers. Norman Rasmussen had been killed while resisting arrest. No mention was made of government involvement, black operations, or the systematic exploitation of vulnerable children under the guise of law enforcement. "The kids are all in protective custody," Marcus said from the chair across from Brett's desk. "Good facilities, real counselors, no government handlers asking them to forget what they saw." "What about their families?" "Relocated with new identities where necessary. Financial support to ensure they don't fall back into poverty." Marcus handed Brett a thick folder. "Your little digital evidence package has been making waves in some interesting circles." Brett opened the folder to find photographs, financial records, and communication logs that painted a picture of corruption reaching far beyond Norman Rasmussen's operation. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, communications between Rasmussen and officials in Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the Drug Enforcement Administration. A network of recruitment operations in 6 different states. "How high does this go?" Brett asked. "High enough that some very important people are suddenly announcing early retirements." Marcus's smile was predatory. "Turns out that when you dump 2 terabytes of classified information on the desks of investigative journalists simultaneously, it becomes very difficult to contain the story." Brett nodded with satisfaction. The digital warfare campaign he'd launched during the assault on Rasmussen's complex had been designed to ensure that even if he didn't survive, the criminal network would be exposed and dismantled. The fact that he had survived just meant he could witness the destruction personally. Any blowback on our families? Brett asked. None. The people who might want revenge are too busy trying to avoid federal prison. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Speaking of which, you've got some visitors who want to thank you personally. The office door opened to reveal Ricky, followed by a young girl Brett recognized from the industrial complex. The 12-year-old Rasmussen had threatened to execute. Uncle Brett, Ricky said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. I want you to meet Sophia. She doesn't speak much English yet, but she wanted to say something to you. The girl stepped forward with the careful dignity of someone much older than her years. In heavily accented English, she said, Gracias. You saved us. Brett knelt to her eye level. You saved yourselves. You were brave enough to survive until help came. Sophia smiled, the first genuine smile Brett had seen from any of the rescued children, and handed him a folded piece of paper before stepping back to stand beside Ricky. Brett unfolded the paper to find a crayon drawing of a man in dark clothes standing between a group of children and several shadowy figures. At the bottom, in careful English letters, someone had written Guardian Angel. She drew that for all of us, Ricky explained. All the kids you saved. We wanted you to know that we're going to be okay. Brett felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. What about you, Ricky? How are you dealing with everything? Better. The counselors help, and Mom's got a new job with better hours thanks to some anonymous benefactor. Ricky's grin was knowing. Amazing how opportunities just appear when you need them most. After the children left, Marcus gathered his files and prepared to follow them out. So what's next for you, brother? Going back to corporate cybersecurity? Actually, I'm thinking about a career change. Brett looked at Sophia's drawing, then at the folder full of evidence that had brought down a criminal network. Turns out I'm pretty good at hunting predators. Might be a growth industry. Marcus paused at the door. The kind of work we've been doing, it's not exactly legal. Neither was trafficking children under government cover. Brett's voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who'd found his true calling. Sometimes the law isn't enough. Sometimes you need people willing to go further. Just remember, Marcus said, once you start down this path, there's no going back to normal life. Brett looked around his home office, thinking about the suburban existence he'd built over the past decade. Safe, comfortable, predictable. It had been a good life, but it had also been a life lived in willful blindness to the predators who stalked vulnerable people like his nephew. Normal is overrated, he decided. That evening, as Brett sat down to dinner with Sarah and Ricky, his secure phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted address he didn't recognize. Mr. Dawson, my name is Wallace Kerr. I represent certain interests that were impressed by your recent work in Denver. We have a proposition that might interest you. Children in Los Angeles are disappearing. Officially, the police are investigating. Unofficially, they're being told to look the other way. Would you be interested in finding out why? Brett deleted the message without responding, but he'd already memorized the contact information. What was that about? Sarah asked. Work, Brett said, cutting into his steak. Just work. But as they ate dinner and talked about Ricky's plans to return to school, Brett's mind was already working through the logistics of a trip to Los Angeles. Somewhere in that city, children were in danger. And somewhere in that city, predators were confident that they could operate without consequences. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 6 months after the Clearwater Industrial Complex raid, Brett stood on the balcony of a Los Angeles hotel room, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber. Behind him, his laptop displayed surveillance footage, financial records, and a complex web of connections that linked human trafficking operations to seemingly legitimate businesses throughout Southern California. His phone buzzed with a message from Ricky. First day of junior year. Mom says to tell you the college counselor thinks my essay about overcoming adversity is scholarship material. Thanks for helping me find something positive to write about. Brett smiled, typing back. Proud of you, kid. Stay strong. The past 6 months have been a whirlwind of covert operations, careful investigation, and what his old military instructors would have called direct action. The Wallace Kerr who'd contacted him had turned out to be a federal prosecutor whose own children had been threatened to keep him from investigating certain cases. Together, they'd built a network of law enforcement officials, military veterans, and concerned citizens who were willing to do what official channels couldn't or wouldn't. They called themselves the Package Delivery Service, a private joke that had taken on deeper meaning as their operations expanded. They delivered justice to places where the system had failed, and they delivered protection to people who had nowhere else to turn. "Brett," Marcus called from inside the hotel room. "You need to see this." Brett walked back inside to find Marcus pointing at a news broadcast. The anchor was reporting on the arrest of 17 individuals in what authorities were calling the largest human trafficking bust in Los Angeles history. Among the mugshots displayed on screen was a face Brett recognized. Dr. Carmen Osborne, a child psychologist who'd been using her position to identify vulnerable patients for recruitment into trafficking networks. "That's the last one from the Kerr files," Marcus said with satisfaction. "The whole network is down." Brett nodded, but his attention was already shifting to the stack of new case files on the hotel desk. Missing children in Seattle. A government contractor in Phoenix who is asking too many questions about refugee resettlement programs. A private military company operating training camps for at-risk youth in Nevada. "What's next?" Marcus asked. Before Brett could answer, his secure phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he'd been expecting. "Dawson," he answered. "Mr. Dawson, this is Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI Human Trafficking Task Force." The voice was crisp, professional, and familiar. Torres had been one of the federal agents who'd helped clean up the aftermath of the Denver operation. "I'm calling with a proposition." "I'm listening." "We've been tracking your freelance activities over the past 6 months. Impressive work. Very impressive. The problem is you're operating outside the law, and that makes my superiors nervous. Should I be concerned about a visit from your colleagues?" Torres laughed. "Actually, you should be concerned about a job offer. We want to bring you in from the cold, so to speak. Special consultant status, full federal backing, resources you can't imagine. All legitimate, all legal, all official." Brett considered the offer. Federal resources would mean access to databases, surveillance technology, and legal authority that his current operations lacked. But it would also mean oversight, bureaucracy, and the kind of political considerations that had allowed operations like Rasmussen's to exist in the first place. "What's the catch?" he asked. "No catch. Just recognition that the traditional approach to human trafficking isn't working fast enough. We need people who can think outside the box, who can move quickly when lives are on the line." Brett looked at the case files on his desk, thinking about the children who were still out there, still vulnerable, still waiting for someone to care enough to take risks on their behalf. "I appreciate the offer, Agent Torres. Really, but I think I'll stick with my current arrangement." "May I ask why?" "Because when I worked for the government before, I had to follow rules that were written by people who'd never seen the consequences of their decisions. The children I've helped over the past 6 months, they couldn't wait for proper channels and official approval. They needed someone willing to act immediately. And you think you can make more of a difference as a vigilante than as a federal agent?" Brett smiled. "I think I can make a different kind of difference. The kind that focuses on results rather than procedures." After ending the call, Brett packed his equipment and prepared to check out of the hotel. His next destination was Seattle, where a series of disappearances suggested another network was operating. After that, Phoenix, then Nevada. Somewhere in each of those cities, children were being exploited by people who believed they were untouchable. Those people were about to discover that Brett Dawson disagreed with their assessment. As he drove north on Highway 101, Brett thought about the conversation he'd had with Sarah before leaving Denver for this extended business trip. She'd known, without him having to explain, that something fundamental had changed in their lives. That her husband had found a purpose that went beyond